Don't say I never gave you Good to see you here.
Good afternoon. I may not look very much like Anne Franklin, but I am going to call us to order. She will be with us shortly and will take over facilitating the meeting once she arrives. She's on her way in. So I believe that we need to first approve the budget. The agenda. I mean, the agenda budget. No. You're going to jump on. The agenda, thank you for catching that. Do I have a motion? So moved. And is there a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, in that case, I think we can go ahead with our opening comments.
Good afternoon. Dr. Baldwin will be heading back shortly, so we will have this work session, and we practiced, so as we always do, that he has seen all of the information, has given input, so it will be like he's sitting in the room with us, and we'll see you back for closed session. This gives us the opportunity to have an annual review with you all on our capital outlay process. It lets you have time and conversation and time to ask questions for forward planning. We're looking today at our facilities, enrollment projections. Deborah's going to share with you the budget that she is getting ready to take forward. So please don't hesitate to stop any of the presenters and ask questions. There's a lot of information. I want to thank Joe for facilitating our capital outlay process. And I see a few principals here who have served on the committee. They do an incredible amount of work. And once you see the amount of asks, if you will, for their buildings, and then what's actually appropriated for funding, it's a big difference. So much work left to do. And thank you, Pat Blank, for serving on the Capital Commission. We know that is an extra commitment, but it is what we're all here to find the best way to meet the needs of all of our school buildings and all of our staff members. So, Madam Chair, we've started, we're just rolling on.
We've called to order.
All right, we'll start with Mr. Huck.
Thank you, Ms. Bonner. Well, board members, here we are again. Seems like we just did this. How time flies, right? First thing I want to do for you is just kind of give you a little bit of an overview of the Capital Committee and basically the tasks they had and kind of how we assembled that group together. And then talk a little bit about more of the money opportunities, which Deborah Frisbee and Tim Fearley are going to assist me with this. So let me give you a little bit of the structure first. Each year when we do this, obviously we won't give representation for all the schools and all the school levels. In this year, all levels, of course, are represented as they are every year. But we typically don't hit every single district because we get way too many folks involved in the process. We do, for the districts that are not represented this year, we do make sure we pick that up next year. So it is a continual cycle, and every district is in fact represented. Obviously, there's big players, in my opinion, with technology, facilities, and maintenance. So Barry Pace added to the mix with Tim Ferry and Clark White. Also, folks that are very much involved with this. And then, of course, there's our principals there for the schools that I was mentioning. When we talk about this process, it really, when you know, it seems like a short time since this time of the year has come around again, but the process is almost takes up about a half a year. I want to first of all let you know that right before we get into the holiday break, about the November and December time frame, principals are already thinking about those things when we mention it in general staff as far as maybe September, October, and we let them know that time of year has come up. So when you look at identifying needs and ranking those needs, they happen at the school level in November, December. And then when they get those basically requests in, we compile those requests coming down that right-hand side. We cost it out, which is a very big task, because you can imagine the number of requests we get. To take it to our subject matter experts, Tim Fearley and Clark White and all their team, they do all that cranking it out to find out what is that dollar figure of their request. So we need a good January, February to do that. So then the committee gets together, dead center of the screen, and all the way from there to the time we make a recommendation to the budget, to just about the time we are right now, is that March time frame into April before we get to the May budget. Here we are. The very bottom part is basically the recommendation and the adoption for the overall budget. Capital outlay is just one portion of it to get to this. And then the last one is the project. Upon your approval, we'll get started just as soon as we can in June, July time frame.
Can I ask a question about that process? Specifically about the costing, since the prices are going up and up and up, and we're having to value engineer everything and cut things out of projects, are we taking that into consideration enough as we go through the costing process?
So I know there's a 10% or something, but are we at this time frame doing it enough? That's an even better question.
It's tough to know what that number is because the escalation rates are so quickly increasing. We try not to just put so much money into it that it's unrealistic either and end up with a big surplus. So we're doing the best we can. We have to talk to a lot of contractors and such. The costs are escalating because when we do go out to bid it, people are busy, and it's hard to predict. It's hard to get someone to even bid your projects these days if it's not a real attractive project. And that's really hard to predict. If you get the bidders, you'll get a good price. But a good example is the steel and aluminum threat of tariffs had raised steel prices 30% in the last 4 months. And that's something that we could not have known when we costed it out. So we're doing the best we can.
Just kind of overall and in general, if I compared this book to the book from last year and the year before, a roof, am I going to see that cost going up?
Yes, you definitely will. And typically there's about a 2.5% inflation in normal times. Now that may be between 5 and 10%. And we just make our best judgment, Clark, Barry, and myself.
Thanks.
This particular slide, I've already pretty much hit the first couple bullets in the previous slide, kind of telling you how that flow works and what are the time frames. I'll kind of stop and hesitate on the day one, day two. What is it like in the process of the committee? We typically look at very first what we call a funding round. We just basically go through every request from every school, and we're just looking, do we fund it or not? I will tell you, 99%, unless we just have one particular item, we go, we know that's the future. We know that, and we just rule that out. But it's just a chance for the committee to really do a good overview of every request that's in there in that funding round. That's really on day one. Then we start getting into those hard cuts. We usually do about 2 cuts before we get to that final where we're really just trying to get it down to that last. Let me frame this for you. We were talking, kind of reminiscing on last year. We went from $40-some million in requests to like 11 million. This year it was even bigger. It was 60 million down to about 12 point something. I can't remember the exact amount. Made the process obviously even harder. And even, Mr. McMahon, like you're talking about with the rising costs, add that to the equation. And then like when we get down to the last one, we get it very, very close, and those last minute decisions are the hardest. We always do ask Dr. Baldwin to come in and help us with a little of those. And we do allow for an appeals day. We give the information back to the principals, and they come back to us, and we hear those appeals, and we have a little bit of reserve left. We just try to sort through what we have remaining based on the nature of the appeals. We do use a voting style when we just really cannot decide amongst the committee. I will tell you, it's usually unanimous as we go through the process. Very, very few times in that process do we really use the voting. I think before I go to that, I was going to just talk, I already said 60 million down to about 12. It's just really the difficulty of that process. What are the other sources of revenue? I'm going to pause for a second and let Ms. Frisbee talk about that.
Okay. So we basically have three sources of capital funds that support these projects. Lottery supports the long-range plans, and of course, you all are familiar with this. You have to approve this, and it also has to be approved by the county commissioners and the Department of Public Instruction. So there are some restrictions on the use of these funds, and it has to be used for construction projects in the schools or to retire debt, and it cannot be used for school technology or modulars. The county of Buncombe serves as our fiscal agent for this source of revenue too. So second source is Article 39 money. That's a special provision that is for Buncombe County, and I think there's another county in the state that gets this money. It has to be approved by the Board of Education. It also goes through the School Capital Fund Commission and the Board of Commissioners. Again, that has to be used for school construction projects of at least $100,000 per project per site or to retire debt service. And the last source of funds is the Article 4042 funds. This is our most flexible source of funding that we get for capital improvements. And it is allocated by the Capital Outlay Committee. Recommendations, as Mr. Huss said, go to the superintendent and, of course, are approved by you. And we actually get this money on a monthly basis. It is in conjunction with our local appropriations from the county.
I'll let you know, board members, we did a little adjustment, just trying in the age of technology, things change, trying to make things a little bit easier on our principals. We had a system we use called Access. We do still use Access in other areas. It's just not really user-friendly to this process. So we changed that to a Google Docs, and the principals liked it much better. The other thing that we had changed is we really, over the last couple of years, tried to scrutinize with 3 levels of categories: absolute necessity, strongly needed to improve, and then future needs. The principals would tell us they get in this area right here and just really did not know how to best interpret that. Some things would go up to classification A and move down to C. They said, really, if you just simplify it to a category A, immediate needs, and a future needs, it would work much better. So we did that. So we went to Google Docs, really got that down just to a category A and B, and the feedback we got was very good. The other things that we do to simplify this, here again, we're talking about 60 million in requests down to 12. The more things we can do before the principals and the committee come together to keep it simplified, the better. Those of you who have seen this slide before in this process, the things like flooring, HVAC, plumbing, roofing, those type things, we try to have Barry Mace, Clark White, Tim Fearley hit those things early and give them a code so that the principals know that those things are taken care of. They can just really focus on the things very unique to their schools. Just try to give you one off the top of my head is auditorium seating that has been long outdated, and you got 10 seats out of all of them that just broke, and just things of that nature. So it really does try to simplify it, so they're really just thinking about the very unique needs of their school. Okay?
So Mr. Huff noted we ended up with about $12.6 million. When we start the process, we have a general idea of how much money there is, but we don't really talk about that. We try to go through the whole book and just evaluate the requests based on their merit. And then typically, we see that we've overfunded because what our real needs are simply outdistances our funds. So then we kind of get an understanding of about where we are, and we go through those cut rounds. There are 3 sources of funds that contribute. And these are really our projected, because this is still going on, interest earned and sales tax reimbursements for each project we do. Contractor fills out a sales tax form and we get a portion of the local sales tax back. They pay it, they put it in their bid, but we do get a portion of that. And so that's an estimate. So this year, 12.6 million, that's more than last year. Last year we were in the 11 million range, but the issue was that we now had $64.5 million in budgeted requests compared to in the 40s last year. So that was a tough job for our committee to go through. But they did. We did several rounds of cuts and had some interesting conversations and prioritization. And I think the principals think it was a valuable process, especially if they hadn't sat on the committee, that they see kind of the big picture in relation to their school, and ended up with a recommendation for the superintendent that will come to you this evening. And this is how that pie chart breaks out in general categories for the types of projects that were recommended. Pretty close to last year. We did get a pretty good influx from the School Capital Fund Committee, the Article 39 for roofing, and that's a little bit low. Technology is a little bit more. We're going through, I believe, our final phase of getting the one-to-one initiative up. We have in-kind replacement, so if carpet needs to be replaced, it was there, it's replaced. There's a lot of those things simply wear out, as does equipment, roofs, paving. There's a known lifetime for that, and we try to keep pecking away at each category rather than concentrating on any single one. Safety has become a big topic, and we're going to look at that a little bit more in a moment. So this kind of shows what happened in the last few years, and when we went through the downturns and the increases in costs and such. We have very similar amount of requests, the number of requests from last year, but the cost of those requests are significantly higher this year for a couple of reasons. The projects were often much bigger. The types of projects, we thought this system of two categories would kind of lower costs, because we weren't pulling projects from last year ahead. Principals had to start fresh. Well, they had some good ideas. And we ended up with some fairly costly requests in there that contributed to that $64 million. Two categories this year versus three categories, and typically we've funded what was Class A and a few Class B and very few future considerations. So you can see the immediate needs by far was the balance of the recommendations. There's only actually two future consideration projects that were funded. One was a really unique opportunity at the North Buncombe High School to build a barn. There is a community group that has kids in the system right now that offered to do all the labor and make this happen if we would buy materials. So kind of the rule of thumb, the most crude form of budgeting on a construction project is you figure out what your materials costs are. That's 1/3. Labor is typically 1/3. Overhead and profit is 1/3. This barn project, basically, we're paying for 1/3 of the project, and it was in future. But guess what? Those community folks' kids are going to graduate, and that opportunity won't be there. And the committee felt it was, an equitable thing to do and a good opportunity. So that did make it into the request, as well as our maintenance fund for stadiums. We are replacing turf and track now. But there's continuing issues outside of simply that replacement of turf and track. And this fund that we put in for future allows Clark and his crew, and Barry really, for the technology that's in the stadium to maintain that and keep it in good condition. And if there are repairs that need to be done that are outside the warranties that we get, we have a source of funds. Because on Friday night, if that stadium is not ready to go, that is not a good thing. So there's only a couple of things in the future. One unique thing this year that the committee has recommended is to do a school security plan so that we can better evaluate a game plan and contribute to the overall school strategic plan to decide what projects to fund. We as a committee could not develop a consensus as to what requests were appropriate and what weren't, and how to address those requests that should have been made. Some schools made a request and we knew there was a bigger issue at another school. So how do we decide what our priorities are? How do we provide for equitable outcomes so that we're not maybe doing too much here and too little at this school, so that we have equity across the system? And we've spent a lot of time talking about how unique each school is. We have schools from the 1920s to current. They all have a very different security profile. They have different needs. We need to understand that. And then we can develop a priority list to focus our limited resources. One thing the committee felt was critical, that we actually develop real plans, schematic in nature, so that we could ultimately budget those estimates. Then we could go after funding. We know how to allocate our limited resources, but there may be grants available. And if we don't have a good plan, it will be difficult to go after those grants and to present to, say, the School Capital Fund Commission. They want to see a real plan with a real cost. So how do we do that? The committee felt it was important to engage specialists with knowledge in the area of school security, but also the building code, because there is kind of a conflict between security and, we'll call it safety, and we distinguish between those two. Safety could be getting out of the building in case of a fire. That's what building codes are focused on. How quickly can I get you out? Security can be intrusion and such. Sometimes they conflict. And the fire marshal, building inspector, North Carolina building code is not going to allow you to do something that violates the building code and causes a safety issue in exchange for maybe a more secure school. We're required to use a qualification-based selection system should you approve this line item. And basically that involves putting out an RFQ, making a short list, interviewing, and making a selection. Typically we look at 3 on that short list so that we can prioritize them. If we can't come to a contractual agreement with number 1, we go to number 2. The committee felt it was really critical, and it is, to involve stakeholders. First we got to identify all the stakeholders. They could be emergency responders, our principals. We have a lot of folks with knowledge in our system and outside of our system that can contribute to this game plan. We're suggesting a steering committee, a smaller group, because it's hard to work with a very large group, but a smaller group that can work with this design team, if you will, to both sculpt the scope of it, to report back to the board, and to ultimately guide the final product. We want a boots on the ground approach. so that we get realistic and effective options as well as budgets. It went too fast. There we go. This is a shot at a timeline. It's a suggestion to try to make this process work, to keep us on track if it is approved, and to maybe hit the funding cycles that occur. So the items in blue are kind of Board of Education action. Here we are today. Here we are today, assuming the board approves the capital budget, and authorizes issuance of an RFQ. The funding isn't really available until early July, when the budget year changes. But there's a fairly long process in that selection and going to contract. It's important to get an RFQ out sooner rather than later. So we would have a steering committee, receive the RFQs, review them, develop a short list, and in September, the School Capital Fund Committee makes a call for Article 39 requests. We may have something we can start to plug into that system at that time when we start talking to our experts and we extract maybe some of the projects that are in the capital outlay book that we feel make sense. Keep moving on. In September, we would hope that the board would be able to approve a contract for this design team and really now hit the ground running. The first thing we need to do is really agree on what the scope of this is. What we don't want to happen is for maybe a national expert to come in and give us the same spiel that they give around the country. That is not what we're looking for. So we want to be really precise of what the outcome of this will be. And then we can go through how this process might work. We would have some updates and such. The board would have an opportunity to both view, have input, and to ultimately approve this plan, and we can integrate it into the overall school-wide security plan, school system-wide strategic plan. It probably isn't realistic to expect that that we could have a prioritized list of projects until kind of the beginning of that capital outlay project next year. But that's where this kind of timeline works back from. We would like to have a good idea of where we are here so that we could do some of or entertain at least some of those projects that aren't so large that would overwhelm the capital outlay process. And here we are, again, the board this time next year would approve the capital outlay budget. We'd have a to-do list to go to the School Capital Fund Committee, identify potential grants and such. I get, just in the last month, periodicals and everywhere school security is being talked about, either within facilities type magazines, there's always articles about it, or these dedicated to school security periodicals and associations. So it's a hot topic, we all know that, and there are experts out there. There's folks outside of Buncombe County that deal with this on a daily basis that we think can be a help to kind of pull together the stakeholders we have here and the unique circumstances we have. We've got to decide where we want to be on that spectrum of school security. Do we want a prison or a walk-in right off the street? Somewhere in there we want to be, and then we want to bring everyone up as quickly as we can to a consistent level. And then this is going to be a long-term project to keep building that security more and more to a position that we can feel comfortable. It's probably a never-ending process. There'll always be adjustments.
So Tim, the funding the budget for this planning process is a line item
It's
here
in the book.
in the book. So is it, am I looking in the right place on page 118 where it says it's $320,000 for
That's
this
correct.
process? Okay.
How did you come up with
Where did that number come from?
$320,000?
We have 42 schools and 43 campuses. We did some math, how much, we want boots on the ground. We want, no, this isn't just a gloss over study. When you kind of do the math of dividing a number by the number of schools, that's kind of where we started, and we threw an arbitrary number out and then adjusted it. There's several schools, though, you know, said, hey, wait a minute, this school or that school, it's probably going to take a much more in-depth study than what we were describing for other schools. So we made our best judgment as to what it would cost per school, and then threw in exceptions, and that's how we ended up with the number.
Madam Chair, may I offer a thought or two about this? I've got some other questions about this specifically. Number one, go back one slide, I think.
More timeline.
No, that timeline.
That one? Okay.
September 2018, and it may be a completely different makeup of that School Capital Fund Commission Board, but I think it's worth our time. I can just about tell you that if you came to the same board on September 4th, 2018 with just information from Buncombe County Schools, the committee's going to send it back because its purpose is not Buncombe County Schools, and they're going to want to know why Asheville City Schools is not involved in this. And we're already looking at 1 year. If we adopt this, you're already looking at 1 year. If you send it back, slow it down any, and bring Asheville City into it in some capacity, I think it would be worth our time to be proactive and have a conversation at some level, superintendent level, in some kind of way to see if that makes sense, so that we don't get it sent back to us now.
Countywide.
That's a good point, countywide, because the School Capital Fund Commission is not just the Buncombe County
Sure.
Schools. I got a feeling it'll be sent right back, and then we're just putting in more delay. Not
So,
delay, but more time involved
Yeah.
to do what needs to be done. I don't know what the correct way to do that would be, but it's worth, in my mind, it's worth a conversation.
Yeah, I would hope that Asheville City would put some money into that.
Well, you
line.
could proportionally do it by the number of schools. It's not really the number of kids. I would look at the number of sites.
The buildings that have to be secured and or made safe
Yeah.
would be what, in my mind, and I think that would be, the current makeup of that board, that's where they would go,
I think that's a good point.
would be with those buildings, and to get everybody involved. Because at the end of the day, whatever's recommended, if you go to the county commissioner for anybody,
Yeah.
you know,
Ultimately,
they're overseeing the facilities and the bricks and mortar of both school systems. So I just think we'd be well served to do that from the front end.
Who's on the steering committee? Go back.
it hasn't been determined yet.
Typically, board member?
Typically, one or two board members. We can have no more than 4, right?
Because I think.
That'd be a quorum,
Sure, but
but
give Pat's comment, would it be appropriate to talk to the city schools about a steering committee that can go ahead and include board
It
members?
might, I just.
So that it doesn't slow down? the
Yeah,
process.
it doesn't slow down the process. I'm not
'Cause
sold.
they meet Monday, so.
Their board does? Yeah, and there may be some communication. I would also throw this out, if I might, Madam Chair. I get it, I totally get it, and I agree with it 100%. But I think at best case scenario, you're looking at 2 years before you do any work with this. And I know you probably.
Because a year of planning and
Yeah.
then a year of
Yeah,
implementation.
and I know we didn't get everybody involved, but I did a little math. $810,500 of requests in this book that are referred to that study. Okay? I'm gonna tell a story, and it's not apples to apples, but I went back, some of you know, I went back in 2011, 12, filled in for a guy who retired at UNC Asheville, working in the athletic department. And this had already begun before I got there, but they were in the midst of having a study on where they were as a Division I athletic program.
It's $125,000 cut. Came back with recommendations, brought an outside group in, talked to all the players, coaches, assistant coaches, athletic directors, president of the university, all that type of stuff. Nice report was presented and given, and at the end of the day, what it said was, you need more money to be able to do what you want to do. Your people here know what you want to do and what you need to do to be competitive and successful, and you need more money to do it. And we just spent $125,000 that we didn't have to tell us what we already knew. It's not apples to apples, because this is completely different. This is adults and kids, safety, I get it. But I worry, there's a specific request in here at Hall Creek Elementary for $20,000 for doors. We can't secure those classrooms in a lockdown. I don't need somebody to come tell me that we need doors on those classrooms for those elementary kids. But I'm not, you could sell me in 15 minutes that this is the best way to go. There's a lot of smart people on that committee that came up with this for a whole lot smarter than I am. But I want to make sure that we flesh this out and proceed in the best way possible for our kids and our schools and the people that work in those schools for the safety. And I don't know the answer. I'm not trying to advocate that this is wrong. But $20,000 to put doors on those classrooms or missing doors at Hall Creek Elementary seems like a no-brainer to me, and it's not funded. It's referred to this committee. So I got at least another school year, maybe 2 school years, and I can't imagine that that group wouldn't come in and tell us, just as an example of that one, yeah, you need to be able to secure those kids in the rooms and not be taking them into wherever they're taking them.
Can I address that one in particular? It's that one, I don't want to defray your point, but that one project is a really great example, because it seems obvious to all of us that that school does not have doors on its classroom. Why not add doors? You can't do it. Because it doesn't have, it used to be an open plan school.
Can't do it, or can't do it because of the other things you have to do required. You deal with ADA and upgrades to the building and all that.
You have to basically gut the school. It has to have rated corridors, and we don't have those. It was partially closed in. And so those,
But you helped me somewhat with my point with that story, and I can appreciate that. You know what needs to be done. But may not have the money to do it in that particular school, but you just told me a solution to what needs to be done that I'm not sure is 100. I mean, I trust you, and it may be exactly what's right, but this group might tell us something different. That's where I'm tugging at this.
Are they outside doors that are in?
no, the inside
interior
corridor,
doors?
the interior corridor doors. They're just temporary, we call them demountable walls. They use bookshelves for walls in the school.
They do.
To give you some idea, even on those where we know we've got some schools with very, very unique, we're not saying we're not putting some money toward that. Let me at least share with you one other item that I think is in there. At least with some hallway doors off the main office, we're at least putting that there to at least mitigate some portion of that very unique concern for that particular school. So yeah, it's not completely, being ignored for this plan. But we do have some very unique safety, security concerns that we are addressing in that. And that just gives you an idea of one of them.
But I think the basic question is valid, is do the experts from the outside know more than the experts on the inside? And do we need to use that time and money if we know?
And because of what you just said, it ties into the other part of what you said. What I read, and I may be reading it wrong, but when you went through boots on the ground and our people on the task force, what I heard you saying was our people, not outside people. But again, I don't know. And we've got, I'm seeing the Sellers here was on the committee and convince me if I'm wrong, because I really don't know. I want to do what's best. And you obviously feel like this is best, because that's what you've come to us with. All I can go by is what I'm reading here, which is not nearly enough information on each of these things as you go through, and what you guys have discussed, because you've spent more time with it. And so I just want to make sure we do the right thing.
And you are right, and I'm just trying to give you some little elements that kind of goes along with your point. Another, as far as us being the expert, the one thing at Hall Creek, add to that just door buzzers, which, we're looking at that for the high schools. I think you got to go back to the point that was made, as Mr. Fearley made up very well, that, you know, with combined a lot of things to look at safety measures as they might conflict with security measures and all that. We do need that outside. You know, there's some things we do know, there's some things we don't know, so we've got to have that combined effort. So I think we've got kind of a marriage of a couple of things. We do know some of those key items, which we have captured, but the grander scale, we've got to address this with this piece.
Max?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with what Pat said and Cindy. And over the years that I've been associated with education, I see this pattern works out, and you're exactly right. You get into this, you bring in experts to give you opinions. In 2 years, you're optimistic probably getting things done. And honestly, the other thing that really concerns me about bringing in the experts, they may have the grandiose plan that is a federal, you know, ideal situation, but getting the money to ever implement that, we'll never have it. And I really am concerned about spending money for a plan from at that level when we already know that there are basic needs in every single school. It boils down to need, want, and desire. What we need are, you know, the basics at this point. We've got schools that the classrooms don't have door locks on. That needs to be fixed tomorrow. Some of this other stuff can wait. That needs to be
Hard
fixed
to
tomorrow.
lock on a door that's not there.
Or put a door up, exactly. Those are the type of things I think that we need to be looking at. And you look at the areas of need, of course, those basic, tangible, brick and mortar kind of things that we know needs to happen. And then I think with our SROs, I'm looking at equity. We always talk about equity in districts. You know, we want to have the athletic programs have the same amount of money spent on each school district. Each school gets the same thing. Nobody gets more. We really need to step back and just look at what we're doing in our schools. We've got 43 schools. Some of them have buzz-in systems, some do not. Some have surveillance systems with cameras, some do not. Some have SROs, some do not, or they're sharing SROs. And then I really think this board needs to look at and make sure that we're getting a report monthly, if not weekly. I want to know, are the SROs in their place? Are they out on leave, sick leave, or whatever the case may be? I understand that we were 3 SROs short, and 1 SRO short in my school district over the entire last year. And we had 1 SRO that was serving 4 elementary schools. And that was typically the one that, you know, you have in a high school or an intermediate school or middle school, but the elementary schools are dangling out here. I really think we need to hold somebody accountable, be it the sheriff's department, whoever it is, to get those people hired, get them in place, and make sure they're there. I asked my principal in Inca High School, one thing, if you could do one thing, what would you do to make your school safer? Now, granted, we've probably got 40 or 50 entries in that school, having buzzers on every door. That wasn't an answer. A brick can defeat $1 million security system, okay? Blocking, holding the door open somehow, disabling that lock, it's defeated. Her answer was, what I would love to have is a second SRO. We've got multiple levels in that school, upstairs, downstairs, a second SRO. That is a priority. We need to make sure that those SROs are there. And if they're not there, we need to say, well, why? Are we not getting applicants? If so, do we need to increase? But I don't know. But that is one of the main things I think would be the most impact for that. And certainly making sure that those classrooms can be locked in case of lockdown and that kind of thing. So I say all that just simply to say, I think if we do go this route, and we do advertise for some firm to come in and do an assessment and all that thing, we can put out for RFPs, but I'll tell you this, it would have to be overwhelming, the amount of work that they would put into it, and what they would give us as deliverables in writing that would be measurable and would be something that would really have an impact on what we're doing and guide us before I would ever vote to accept any bid on that. I think we've got the sheriff's department, police department, fire departments, emergency services, and the principals and the employees in the schools that know where the problems lie, and they can give it to us. We don't have that much money. We've got $64 million in requests. We've got $12 million to fund it with on our total large project budget, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to waste money on a survey when we, it's just blatantly evident some of the things we need to be doing.
But you must have the person power to do it internally. Is that, another thing is, you know, we have folks who have very full-time jobs already, and if we're asking them to do this on top of the important work that they're already doing, how does that work? You know, it's another question too.
Well, and the other thing is, at no time, I believe I can speak for everybody on this board, that do we want to not, to fail to do something that would enhance our security or enhance the safety of children. What we're talking about is, or what I believe we're talking about, is effective expenditure of money for the outcome. And I want to echo, I think when people say that, I want to echo what Cindy said. We have a staff that our expectations are very high in regards to their job, and they reach those expectations regularly. But are we asking them to go and do another job on top of what we're already expecting them to do? I think we have to take care of that manpower, those expectations. And I do.
And Madam Chair, maybe, Mr. Campbell, maybe you could help me with this. Could we as a board, again, I'm not against this, but I would like to make sure, because there's been a lot of valid points. I want to make sure that we take what the board and the superintendent and staff, because you guys have put the hours and the time and your work on this, that we make sure that if this is the way we go, that we are clearly defining and directing what it is we're wanting to know in terms of information. Because I can see this going a whole lot of different ways. There's a completely different look in terms of asking someone, tell us, do we have enough security personnel on our campuses, versus telling us how secure are the buildings, the windows, the doors, the roofs, the ductwork, all the different kind of ways you can get in and out of buildings if somebody bad wanted to do something. So I could be okay with this if we just make sure, and I think that's what I'm hearing you say, Max, too, is making sure we direct what we think, and maybe that's 2 people from this group and 2 from Dr. Baldwin's staff and 2 principals getting together and coming up with 8 or 10 bullet points or whatever it is of this is where we want this to go.
Maybe that strategic planning committee that's in place that Joe leads could be expanded to include some, what does it look like based on this discussion?
We have some things in here that are being asked for that have to do with, when you say that, there's something at an intermediate, and when I looked at it, I thought, sure, that's under warranty. The school's not that old. We don't give it one chance at this. We got to get this right. This we got to do right. We can repaint a building if the roof was bad, you know, we can, but we got to do right. So I don't know that I'm 100% comfortable with enough information just for this part, just this little part.
Who are you pointing to?
We had a very similar discussion in the Capital Outlay Committee, very similar. As we went through the book, we thought all those security requests were legitimate, but we knew we didn't have enough funding, and we identified other security issues at other schools that we knew about that simply weren't being requested. So is it the squeaky wheel system that gets it done? And we had a hard time prioritizing, should we do this or that? So, and 2 of our principals that were in the capital committee are here and participated in that. Can you help us out?
Sure, I don't mind, and I'm sure you're helpful too. When you're looking at that, and every bit of heartburn you had was the same heartburn we had gone through. Because I look at that amount of money and think, wow, I would love to have that at Reynolds High School to fix some things that worry me and concern me every day. If you've been there and you visited, you know that
we have an extremely accessible campus without even gardens. But then when I realized that's me and selfish and advocating for my school, and there's 42 others that would be doing the exact same thing for their facility, of which they're the expert of. And when you start looking, well, we need to take care of Hall Creek, because I'm in Hall Creek, it's in our district. I go there and I visit and I see when you walk in, oh wow, you need to work on this. I think a good portion of that money was even still a study for Hall Creek, not even to do what is needed at Hall Creek to secure that environment fully. So in that discussion one day, you go back and you reflect upon that, you come back and you start day 2 of this, and you're going, whose child is more important? Whose school is more important? I wanted to take that money and say, well, let's do this and this and this, but then somebody is over here truly left out of having a safe and secure environment. None of our buildings, maybe 3 or 4 of our facilities were built after Columbine, maybe at the most. All of us were built before when they were constructing our facilities. You were not thinking about how do you lock this place down? How do you keep somebody out of it? So in that daily discussion, I think one of the comparisons I gave it to was several years ago, Dr. Adele presented us a multi-year implementation of some of our athletic facilities. It was organized, it was prioritized, and it had a plan to it, rather than just, let's try this over here in this district and try this over here in this district. And that was one of the places my mind went to, was having something presented that is from experts, and I do believe we have experts. We have them in our own community. But once again, who's that going to be within our own system? Because we're all not sure where we'd add hours in to get it done ourselves. But to someone who, I think years ago we had, what's his name, Michael Doran, who came and presented things to Buncombe County Schools on school safety. If there was someone out there, and I don't think any of us around the table knew who it was, we kind of left it up to some very thorough research of getting the right firm to do this, to give that overall objective but yet knowledgeable plan of where to start. I do think we funded some things immediately this year, like buzzers in our buildings. But we had a study done at Reynolds High School. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think to secure our campus totally, along with the middle school, was over $1 million, correct?
Well, that's the total cost. Will it secure your campus totally? We don't think so.
And probably nothing is going to secure us from that determined person, which is what all of us fear every day. But without taking up too much time, I guess that's where our heart was, is where do you start? Do you start band-aiding or making decisions or being selective with here, or do you get a plan in which to get going with this? And I think we, with a lot of thought, but yet also some concern and apprehension of spending the money on a plan rather than going ahead and spending that immediately in some of the buildings. And we did lean towards that effort to get a plan for us and then to prioritize it and get started with the funds.
I agree. I mean, it was not an easy thing to come to, but it also wasn't an easy thing to come to that, is it more important to restructure the entrance of Barnardsville? Is it more important to get some immediate doors at Hall Creek? We knew we weren't security experts. We did discuss involving Lieutenant Ruby and some of our local folks, but then all they can do is tell us security-wise that this is what needs to happen, but they can't cost it out like having a team with architects involved that would be able to put some dollars behind the amounts.
So, could I?
Yes, but I want to give Clark an opportunity to
Well,
speak.
I want to tie into Sellers, Dr. Adele's story. I'm going to tell you how that came about. So David Ball came to me, I was on this board, he came to me 2 years before that recommendation and all was put together and said, said, we can't play night games, we got lights in this field, they're not working. We had a kid get hit almost in the head with a line drive because he couldn't see it in the shoulder as the sun was going down. And I said, I'm having to stop now. No longer will anybody be on this high school field. We need lights. He said, can you help us? I said, David, I can't help you. But here's how we can get it done. You need to go to Dr. Baldwin and whoever else you need to talk to. And if it comes from you guys up to us, I can just about guarantee you we'll support it. If you've thought it out and you've planned it out and you've faced it and done something. So they did. I don't know who all was involved in it. I know it was athletic directors, maybe the coach. I don't know who all was involved in it. But the internal folks, and I get it, it's not safety. I understand it's not. And a baseball field with 300 feet down the line and 400 to center, they're all pretty much the same. Figuring out lighting and that kind of, I get it, it's different. But that was the encouraging thing for me on the board was when it came to us, we didn't have anything to do with it. It came from you guys, y'all the ones with the feet on the ground and the smart people in the room. And you brought it to us and we adopted it and it's been implemented. And that's where I'm torn on this. It just, I
It
just.
may not be as easy as that.
Yeah.
And it probably is.
And that's why I said from the beginning, I could be convinced in 15 minutes that this is the best way to go. Somebody could easily do that, because I don't have the answer. And I'm just one board.
I'd like to recognize
Yeah.
Clark.
Clark, sorry.
Listen to all the conversation, and it's really interesting. I think when we talk about getting a committee together to go this route, one key player, I like the idea of the city. I also think we need to involve the county commissioners.
Yes.
One big thing, one reason we didn't address or didn't want to address it in this budget, can't afford it. If we do this, we know we have needs. We know we have needs will cost lots of money that this will never fund, ever. And, you know, getting a process in place, because we don't have time. I'll speak for Kim and I, we're emailing each other at midnight, you know, talking about what's going on. And it's true. And it's, so adding this to it, you will not get a good document out of it. Could we do it if we had nothing else to do? Sure we could, you know. But I think it's important to understand the scale of this and to also, we all live in our own house and we all have those things that we walk by every day and you know it's messed up but you don't care because it's just your house. This almost brings a fresh set of eyes to the table of things that we may be blind to. That we may think is a problem, it may not be a problem, or vice versa. So I think from our perspective and the committee's perspective, we feel like this is the best way to create a plan that will have an equitable distribution across all schools and all children, just like the athletic plan. You know, that was a simple process. This is not a simple process.
And I would like to concur with Max Queen on what you said about that, and I think we all said this as well. We don't want to throw money at an advertisement of somebody says, oh, this is what we do. I believe there needs to be extremely thorough research of if the board approves this, who would be awarded this, so we know we're getting something for our money rather than just jumping on the next bandwagon of somebody who's, you know, taking advantage of a situation across our nation right now. We need to know what that product is going to be going into it, what the result.
Mr. Campbell?
Is the idea that this will be funded through the Capital Fund Commission? That it would be?
No, the study is in this book, Capital Outlay.
The work.
The work is, let's identify what the projects are, prioritize. We peel off some perhaps in this Article 4042. We would go to the School Capital Fund Commission, Article 39. And I think Clark makes a good point. Commission, we probably will need additional help unless we want to take 10, 12, 15 years.
So that's kind of where the two ideas come together to address all the concerns. It sounds like a strategic committee that is made up of both school boards and the county. And the first job of that strategic committee is to decide what they need advice on. Come up with the RFQ. to go out to the security experts.
The items that would go into the
Yeah,
RFQ.
yeah, what is it that we do need expert opinions on and get that, but I agree, I think all three considering, especially considering your funding and where your funding's gonna have to come from. So it seems like all three, and then that gives you your obvious argument that this is bigger than 40, 42, and 39.
Do we need to do something as a board to address that, or can we just, as a directive to Madam Chair, or the thumbs up type of thing, that
In
this
this
is?
work session, you could just by consensus say that you'd like the superintendent to look into that, or the city superintendent and the county committee. Yeah, that can just be by consensus.
Without having to amend or do anything to what's being presented to us today.
The only thing I don't know is anything about this being asked to be approved at the open
This
session
evening.
tonight. This
See, money is, yeah, it's
That is a
a-
big
Okay,
set.
we can amend the recommendation on the strategic
Yeah.
plan steering committee to include discussions with the city schools and the county. We can amend that tonight and approve it. So we can just wait and do that in the open session.
So
Do we have no problem?
there
with
is
it?
$320,000 there in the book. We are right on the edge. We can't just throw that into contingency. How do we, Chris, address that item in the book? We can't, like I said, we can't throw it into contingency because we'll violate the size of our contingency until action is taken place on this, or?
Your contingency's under, your request for contingency's under is it that much under?
Only 100,000 under.
So could you not still
The max.
allocate that money subject to the
Yeah.
superintendent avenue? So you go ahead and
And we'll just
allocate
hold
it.
on, we won't take action on it until
Well, that-
further
We
direction.
can approve it contingent upon asking,
Yeah.
directing our superintendent to discuss with the city superintendent and the commission.
That's a separate request.
That one.
That is an
It is, it's a
individual
separate request
tonight.
to issue an
It's
RFQ.
its own separate action item, to issue the RFQ to begin this process. While
So
it's
we could
included
approve-
here, it is a separate item.
So what we can do is amend that separate item to say that it is approved contingent upon the superintendent having discussions with the city and the county about joining
Yeah,
them.
But it's still.
And then it's a
the
placeholder.
it would be
Yeah,
there.
if it
And we can't really
And you can come back and amend the
do
budget
anything
later
with
like
that
you
money
did.
until July 9th.
Yeah.
Right,
It's not available until
but
July
you
9th.
got to do 2 months.
But
Right.
am I correct or incorrect in saying that, could that $320,000 be used to address the basic known needs in building, in the buildings, the locks, the things we know are needed there?
Which one should we address? Because there's,
Well, I think the $320,000 should go what we know. I would hate to say that the whole classroom's sitting out there and we go into lockdown, they can't lock the doors. I think I would be pretty hard pressed to defend that.
I can't fix that for $300,000 though.
Can you fix one?
One door?
One door?
No,
Well,
You can't fix one door for
Because
$300,000?
there's no walls. There's no
it would be a code violation.
Okay, okay.
The walls only go up to the ceiling tile.
We
They
don't
need
have
to
any
go all the way up
classrooms
to the
that have
roof.
doors that do not lock. No classroom, they are all locked.
Did you hear him?
I'm sorry, say again.
If a classroom has a door there, the doors are locked.
So currently, everything locked?
Everything
But you have
locked.
some open spaces where classes are being held?
That
Yes,
this
the whole
amount of money
school's
won't
Okay,
touch.
okay.
Come on, Hot Creek, I'll show you Max.
Well, I didn't realize that. I know there's open areas, and there's playgrounds, we send hundreds of kids on the playground every day.
Yeah.
And we need to have an item in there to address, at least in the meantime, off of the main office area, some walls and some doors that at least will mitigate some of that risk. Time now.
That's that corridor that's,
Yeah.
22,000 on page 6.
yeah, 22, yeah.
So you couldn't go down the corridors up where those classes are. You could stop people there, keep them in the
And close off
edge.
There's not anything from the other side or anywhere.
That we could lock off.
When they buzz in to come to that front office
So that
area,
was, that's what
That's-
control
they have to be
access.
buzzed, pretty much controlled again before they even get to those areas that we're talking about.
And this money is only earmarked, we can only spend it on brick and mortar, correct? Or can it be used for personnel?
Not 40, 42.
Okay, not for this, we can't use it.
Not for
there.
SROs,
But we can use it for this study.
for a study that we do that regularly when we have to hire a designer to design a solution that is part of, what's funded there.
This is a hard, this is.
Sorry, yeah. That's why we brought it up separately.
In your budget document that is submitted to you for approval for 2018-19, it is a base budget. If you look at the budget amendment, the resolution, and for capital outlay, it only represents $22 million. So what we don't know is as we have to go and talk to the school capital commission about these things, and they're awarded, and we put that money in there through a budget amendment. But right now, there's just $22 million in this document to be approved, so, and it's what we know right now. This is just a base budget to get it submitted to the county.
Well, I can tell you, there's not, here's the,
It's not itemized.
here's the problem, is the School Capital Fund Commission has decided that we have front-loaded, as you know, a lot of things. There's not going to be a lot of money there
For a couple of years.
for a couple of years. We've gone out with the things we know, and in Asheville City as well. We've gone out some years in the future and packaged them all together in terms of a bond, and not bond, but let me see this bond and loan. And so the logistics of this, where the money's going to come from. And I think that's why, and I didn't say it, but I think that's why whoever said it, involving the county commissioners in this, we've got to get that. We've got to have the city of Asheville schools, in my mind, it is, and the county commissioners as well. They got to be at the table from the front end, not the back end. It doesn't do us any good to do this and go to them and go, well, why didn't we know about this? Yeah, we probably make a mistake.
And then we decide as a group,
Right.
how far, like Tim said, there's a level between nothing and maximum security prison.
Right.
Where do we fit on
What
that
we do.
level? Where do we want to be? And how do we get all the schools there? This will create a plan, how we get from point A to point B at every school. And how many years, I don't know, how many years you look at it. And part of it would be chunked off in the years, every year by this budget. Part of it maybe even have to be a bond, who knows?
I'm sure the commissioners don't want to not provide safe schools. I was trying to find a better sentence than that, but it wasn't coming out. I'm sure that the commissioners do not want to be thought of as not protecting our students.
And the same could be said at the state level, that you perhaps the commissioners could advocate on.
Yes. Oh, Mr. Case.
So I do want to just direct something to the attorney. So if Asheville City has already completed this process for their capital outlay, I think that is something that I'd just like your opinion on in terms of if this board goes for the combination and we have a certain set of funds available that ACS has yet to set aside in the funds. Is there anything
That just has to be worked out between the two superintendents. I mean, that's an obvious part of the conversation, is that this is going to be a joint effort, it needs to be jointly funded. So how do we get there? It hasn't been on their radar screen, so this is not, obviously, so they're going to have to think about it. So that'll be one of the things the two superintendents and the two finance officers will have to have some discussion on. Sure. That'll have to be worked out, and that's
And
the
our
reason we have budget amendments,
Yeah,
so that you
okay.
can change things down the road.
And our superintendent could say, I bring you $320,000 worth of toys, what are you gonna give me, so that we can play together? Would be, yes, sir.
Challenge, and just kind of, we know what, we do know there's certain knowns as we proceed forward with this amount of money. It's the unknowns, like Ms. Churchill said. Commissioners, so the state is concerned, the state is talking right now. And one of the other things that this product will do, as soon as, and it may be a year, Mr. Bryant said, or 2 years, but when that money does come, let's say the state does give something, we have a product that has costed items ready to go, where other systems are fumbling with that state money. We can sit here and say, this school needs this, based on the amount of money. Your line items 1 and 2 out of 8, 9, 10 can be done. Here we go, let's go.
Well,
I
and
don't
then,
understand that, and you're talking about shovel-ready kind of product, but let me throw another consideration to you. What if we go down this road and we hire our quote expert to come in and they go about their business and they set a strategy, these things need to be addressed first. And the work that the state's doing or the federal government's doing, and they're going to set a gold standard for what needs to be occurring in schools. And whatever we paid our expert to do does not necessarily mirror what comes down the pipe that's going to be regulated by the state or the federal government, what they say needs to happen. And that they're in opposition or just don't agree on every point. So we have spent the money and we are going down that road. But again, I just want, all I want to know, and the only thing I want, and I'm not necessarily say that people with that expertise come to the table, they can provide us something, so long as they spell it out, clearly measurable, the deliverables, we know what we're getting, and they can deliver on it. And it is not just simply regurgitating something else they did in Utah or Washington State or wherever. They've got it all in a boilerplate type situation. They simply change the name and put Buncombe County Schools in there and say, here you go.
Which is
That
exactly
is
what
what I
Tim
do
already
not
said.
want to see happen to us. And the other thing, I'll say this one more time, and I'll hush. The issue of the doors, that was one issue. I'm sure there are other very, very basic needs in our schools. Some have, some don't. We need to address the basics. We know it. I mean, it's so obvious. Then why not spend this money on getting those basic, whatever's left, throw it toward this, okay? But I just feel like, I feel like we're talking about years, we're talking about implementing, and I understand that. I understand that you don't want to jump into something, you need to plan. But we can't ignore the immediate. We can't ignore what some character might decide he wants to do tomorrow.
And that was part of the philosophy of trying to Hall Creek, those doors, and same along the lines of what you're saying, when we looked at the high school door buzzers. You know, collect a few of those items, just as you're saying, and let's go ahead and do that. Even with this in place, let's still address security with those items.
And the other question, I mean, as Amy just pointed out, maybe if we don't right now have the opportunity to gut Hall Creek Elementary and build walls inside it and put lockable doors, maybe we have a full-time SRO there. And that's really what equity is. It's not about doing the exact same thing at every place. It's about making sure that the needs in each place are met. And if we're not able right away to meet the needs with walls and locking doors, can we use some humans to actually help make situations more secure in the meantime? So it may be sort of a both and.
I'd rather have that human side, because our SROs are not just there protecting those buildings, but they are developing relationships with our students. So we get that mental health piece taken care of too. I know they're not mental health professionals, but especially at the elementary level, that's building relationships, and that is giving them a great mental health towards, what they consider when they see a police officer.
I would also hope that if we could, and I think that the potential is there to join successfully with Asheville City and probably with the commission, that maybe that would put pressure on the state to look what we're doing locally with our limited funds. Come on and help us out.
And don't underestimate the power of your parents, getting them on board. And it should very much be, part of help us communicate the importance of your child's safety.
And we have usurped Tim's presentation, I apologize, but we did ask questions if you want to go back to consideration.
Yeah, and we can wrap it up pretty quick.
Yeah,
It's an important discussion, and we knew.
And we're all very
where we were
sincere
going.
in what we're saying, everybody in this room.
We need to have the discussion.
Yes.
This is just a summary slide. We talked about what we were able to fund. This first category here is what wasn't funded under immediate needs and future. And next year, there's going to be more future and more immediate needs. So, our needs outdistance the funding. We know that, so we prioritize and we peck away at it as best we can. And we're in better shape than most. We really are. We're in much better shape than most. I used roofing as an example. That's something that can shut things down if it isn't working, but there's a lot of other components if you don't have outside air and heat and cool. So this sort of example applies to a lot of other things, but we didn't budget 1.4 million of what I would consider pretty immediate. That means Mr. Wyatt probably will be out there patching some roofs. We're gonna have some leaks because we're not able to get to, I don't know which ones will leak, but Clark will find them and he'll patch them. Right, Clark?
I thought you were gonna say, but Clark will know.
He'll get a call, and that's what we have to do. And then, you know, every year, we're gonna see numbers like that come before us. So that's the, just the truth of it. And activity buses, those buses that travel out of the county have been a priority. And we're kind of falling behind on our replacement criteria. So we do have other needs other than safety that we just need to keep working at, prioritizing, doing the best we can.
Can I ask a quick bus
Yeah.
question? And I ask this in honor of my friend Richard Sales, who was my children's bus driver for years and years, and he lost him over the last month or so. And he talks to me often about seatbelts on buses.
I'll turn it over to Mr. Huff. He's our
Wondering
expert.
if there's been any more conversation about seatbelts, and, you know, there's no mention of it in the outlay that I see. And so just wondering if that's something that we're considering.
And I'll tell you, in the studies that I've heard, even toward the latter years of being director of transportation, everybody, all LEA is very much interested in that. I think there's a couple of counties very locally that have piloted that, wondering the effective nature of that. You kind of have to look at that from a standpoint of if a bus is on fire or goes off an embankment into a creek and the water maybe with flood. You know, what is, you know, if any child that needs assistance getting out of those seat belts, you know, could that, you know, happen? Or versus just the only, you know, the opposite, the counterpunch to that is just a basic crash. It does its job and does its job very well. That feedback is still ongoing, listening very close. Would love to probably draw Ms. Durner, current director of transportation, see if that's anything we want to pilot and talk to the state. I would like to think that as the state's very looking at that and has some of these counties involved, they would take a good portion of that on as a state with the ultimate decision to go that way. The last data across the 50 states, as far as the states that do require it for their public schools, 7 out of 50. Why isn't it more? Really, it kind of comes back to that, you know, are there some dangers to it? Yes, there are. Are there some positives to it? Yes, there are. And it's just a matter of fully vetting just to ultimately decide, is this the way that particular state wants to go? If North Carolina does eventually get to that point based on that data, I would like to think that with the state commitment, they will help with the majority of that funding to outfit those buses. The little bit that I've heard, it's helpful as far as when a student is basically seatbelted in from just a disciplinary standpoint, they're less likely to move between seats. That's one of the positive things that I'm hearing, away from the, you know, crash and that sort of thing. So far, it's probably getting more positives, I would say, than negatives, but I think the state just wants to see a little bit more vetting of it.
And Richard was under the impression that the state would help with it.
Yes, yes. And that's, I think that historically, that's what they're saying of the 7 out of 50 is that the states went ahead and just adopted it.
But even in North Carolina, he was saying that right now they would.
I would imagine.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question about the fees that we charge for the, you know, when people participate in sports and it goes towards, you know, the activity bus and transportation thing? Does any of that money go to the maintenance of these activity buses?
Of the activity buses, you have to help me out again.
Is it just strictly the gas and the person driving the bus? Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Fear.
May I ask you a question?
Yes, if you may.
May I ask you one question? On page 118 of the budget proposal, could you explain to me the request for a supplement for ADA signage projects at all high schools to replace defective signs by a poorly performing sign company? What's the reason we're having to keep the cost of it, so a poor job the sign company did? Why are they not making good on
You know, sometimes these questions are kind of hard, and you can look at his face and tell.
That is a hard one, and it's probably the worst project that I've been associated with, the most difficult project. It started over 2 years ago, and they just last week went in and replaced some signs. So basically, we are dragging them over the finish line, but their finish line is not the same finish line as what we expected. The only alternative is to a lawsuit, really. We've done everything that we can to get what we can out of them. My, soothsaying in the future is we're going to need to do some work ourselves, and maybe Mr. Campbell can help me if it's worth it to sue a company like this for, $40,000 or $50,000. I don't, that is an option.
And that's the problem, is whether or not we can collect attorney's fees. And typically with the breach of contract, you can't, typically. But I can look at it, Mr. Fairley. But you do run into that economics of the lawsuit and what you have to spend to get there. But it's something we can certainly talk about.
Yeah.
Take a look at the contract too.
Okay. Asheville City got in a set too with somebody about the signs when the signs that came in, and they peeled right off and they weren't working.
We get
They didn't function well.
the low bidder. We have to take the low bidder. If they can meet the very minimal requirements, they're not currently in jail, and they give us a bid and they can do the work, we have to take them. And this is a company out of Tampa Bay that, just like other experiences we've had, when we don't have someone local, there's not a lot of peer pressure on them to perform. They don't care if they ever work in Asheville again. And like I said, it's been 2.5 years, a huge amount of staff time, a lot of frustration for our high school principals. It's been really rough.
Thank you, Mr. Fairley. This is always very informative. And I'm going to ask Mr. Campbell to move his presentation to after the break, and we'll take a break now.
Are we done with it? Because I've got some more questions about some of the things in the book. Are we going to come back to this, or do you? I would really appreciate the opportunity to ask.
I'm not cutting you off by any means.
We can do a shorter break. We can, Deborah will need 25 to 30 minutes because you may have questions about the budget. Tim will be doing the enrollment in the facilities, and that could be a 30 to 40 minutes.
So we could do a 5-minute break if there are 2 or 3 bathrooms in the building. We could not get in the line and get ourselves back in here.
Yeah.
Okay.
We need to have you finished by at least 4:30, 4:40 so that you can get down to the teachers of the year.
Right.
We'll try to.
This day is always a bear when it comes to time. So, thank you very much. So, we just moved Mr. Campbell to after the break. We took 10 minutes of our break for Mr. Campbell, and it is now time for Mr. Bryant.
So, I don't know who to ask this question to, Mr. Huff, or whomever.
Yes, sir.
In looking through this, I think we've safety, being safe, safety, those issues. There are a number of places in here, without me identifying them all, that ADA is mentioned, that ADA is not funded. There are, best of my memory tells me, there were 3 places where it was $250,000 in all 3 different schools to replace fire alarms. 1 was funded, 2 were not. The verbiage, as I read it, read exactly the same. And I'm curious as to how, are all 3 of those schools in the same safety realm
So what we
as
do,
it relates to their fire system?
what we do with fire alarms, all our fire alarms stay operational all the time, whatever it takes. If we replace one this year, the one that's funded, we will keep all the parts out of that system and keep the other ones operational until we can. And as far as them saying the same thing, probably just laziness on our part. No.
So they're not all in equally bad disrepair and needing
They
replacement?
have hit their age of their life expectancy. So what we have trouble out of each one of them from time to time and repair, but the ones that we request to get funded, I guess would be our most troublesome system.
And how about ADA? For example, we were on page 118, supplement to exterior improvements for ADA at all high schools as required by the Office of Civil Rights, final phase, $125,000 requested and zero funded. The way that reads to me is not that we have a choice in this.
And we have, that will complete the project. We've done multiple phases.
Right.
And there is funding from last year still to address the final phase, which is exterior things like parking lots and ramps and such. And while this would, what we think would finish it, we do have some working funds to continue to make progress.
Okay. Elliot, there's several places in here are LED lights.
Okay.
Are they not included in what we've partnered with the School Capital Fund Commission and the Board of Commissioners of the County of Buncombe to do?
No,
If
so-
not, why? Are they just in?
So
different
our
types of
focus,
places?
there are different type of light. Our focus with what we're doing with the city are these, what you see above you, the 2x4
Right.
fixtures basically across the county. And the lights you see are maybe something like a can light over there, or a light that's exterior to a canopy or something, but it's a different type of light. So that's the simple answer to that one.
My next question is kind of all tied together, and this covers it. So I moved pretty quick, Madam Chair.
I'm impressed from
I'm
the
in the
environment.
countywide capital budgeting several places without getting specific pages. So contingency on page 117, 474,000. I was able to find my 2016-17 book, but not my book from last year. And in 16-17, that number was 358,000. And what I couldn't find in that book, that my question is so on page 120, unanticipated electrical, unanticipated plumbing. Those to me are all contingency items, but I can't find those types of requests. And when you start adding those up, we're at $150,000 to $200,000 of unanticipated additional items that I couldn't find in this book, but they may have been in last year's book, which I just couldn't locate. So help me understand
So
that.
like Tim was saying earlier about we're not fully funding our roofing this year. So that we know right off the bat, that's going to create more problems that are going to occur, more leaks that we're going to have to repair. So we dip into those funds to make repairs, whether it be an electrical system, plumbing system, a roof. We tap those funds first prior to any contingency. We have aging structures, and our needs are growing.
Could I offer that while they're unanticipated where they're going to occur, they're totally anticipated that they are going to occur.
Well,
We just don't know which school to assign to it because we haven't fully funded all the stuff and something's going to break.
Those line items haven't been there in the past. That's my question, is the items, if they're in there, if they're in this book, I can't find them.
So one thing we did for simplicity this year,
Which is confusing the thickness out of your board.
I'm sorry. We tried to make it simple for ourselves because we had it broken down like,
Understandable.
we had a line for fire alarms, we had a line for things that come up where we need to put an outlet for a technology device. We had all these different lines, they all related to electrical. So we tied it into one budget code just because it's all electrical work. And then plumbing work, if we have a plumbing pipe break, it's just, we used to have them for boilers or for steam lines and then plumbing. We just put all that into one line. So we have changed for simplicity purposes that just makes it easier to keep track of.
But the question is, why is it not in contingency? Why is it separate from contingency?
Well, I guess because I consider it the maintenance contingency. Barry doesn't touch it, Kim does. This is what I've got to handle emergencies. Barry's got his part, Tim's got his part, and then when it really gets bad, we go to Joe and say, hey, we're out of money, we need some more.
So the 474 then is kind of an umbrella over everybody.
That's correct.
Yeah, and it
Well,
is
that helps.
controlled
That
by a
helps.
percentage of your budget that you
Right.
can put towards contingency.
Right.
And typically, we spend that every year. That's for one big blow-up of a roof, stormwater, a chiller, a boiler.
Not a little additional.
Right.
That contingency could potentially.
Well, that one
do that.
thing could get rid of all of that.
Yeah,
You got it.
Can I ask
Madam Chair,
one?
that was it for me. I'm sorry. I was taking-
May I
Thank you.
ask one?
Well,
One?
yes.
Just one. Bell Elementary, which has desperately,
It is now time for Mr. Campbell to enlighten the fire department.
Very good, thank you, Madam Chair. And this is not an item that is up for action tonight, this is just to give you the basic concept and make sure that the board is in favor of it.
Excuse me, we're referring to the colorful sheet that you have.
So in your package, you have two things, you have the map of the intermediate campus, and you also have the bylaws, articles of incorporation approved by the Secretary of State for the Egypt Campus Fire District. And Mr. Queen is provided for us. So you have both documents in your packet to look at. So the first thing is just to get the concept, first of all, if you look at the map of the Eka Intermediate School, you will see that, adjacent to Jacob Home Way are two parcels. They would be two separate parcels if we agreed to a lease, but they're two areas that are not currently being used by the school, and Mr. Bailey can address that further if you've got additional questions. But they are pieces of the campus that we're not currently using for school purposes, and the request is from the Inca Candler Fire Department to put a fire station on that property. Two things to know about that. One, when the Inca Candler Fire and Rescue Department was incorporated, their articles of incorporation say that upon dissolution, all assets remaining to be transferred will be delivered to the Board of Education for Buncombe County, North Carolina, for use in connection with the operation of public schools in the school district that is now the boundary of Inca High School in Buncombe County, North Carolina. So when they set the fire district up, they set it in a way that all of their assets, if they were ever to be resolved, if the city were to take over fire in that area or something of that nature, those assets would revert back to, or would go to the Buncombe County schools. So that's good. The second thing you need to know is that obviously having a fire station on the campus of an intermediate school and this close to our other schools in the Inca district has an obvious advantage to the Board of Education.
you say yes in the Reynolds District.
Yes.
That is true.
It is. The advantage for safety, security, all the things you've been talking about, ratings on insurance and other things for property insurance, having a fire station located right there has just incredible benefits. The issue that we've got is, it's not a difficult issue, but we'll have to consult with others, is this campus is currently titled to the county of Buncombe, because as you know, they use the property as security for the construction of the school. That lease that we have, we're leasing this property until the debt's paid off, and at that time, the county transfers the property back to us. That lease does provide that we can sublease. So normally, we would go through our normal process of declaring these two areas, we'd further define them, we would declare them surplus, we would offer them to the county, and then we would lease them to the fire district. There is a specific provision of law, which I'll give you so that you have it, which allows us to lease property directly to a fire district, a volunteer fire district. So that we've got that in the statute. The issue is going to be how the financing entity for the county would like this done. Because right now, our lease is subordinate to the financing agreement on the property. So they could approve this because obviously we cannot give a sublease with any greater rights than we have. So if we were to sublease the property to the fire district, it would still be subordinate to the financing agreement. For some reason, they could want the county to lease it directly to them, at which point we would be agreeing to that lease or giving our consent to that lease. So I don't know the specifics until I talk to the county attorney about how that would work. So all I needed tonight from you was to make you aware of this, see if you've got any specific questions, and then if there are no strenuous objections, I would enter into discussions with the county about how to actually make this work and then come back to you as an action item at a later date. So questions for myself and Mr. Queen, or?
I have one question. So, Max, you're on the board, right?
I served as, on the board for 30 years. I just retired off in October.
He was
Oh, you're
incorporated.
But I signed that document you have where we
Yeah.
established the department in '87.
Right, I saw that. Thank you for your service. So that was gonna be my question, was whether that would be a conflict of interest in any way, which I wouldn't think it would be even if you were still on the board, but you're not on the board anymore. Okay.
So no problem now.
Other questions?
Everyone has heartburn, I'll talk to the county attorney.
One thing I would just throw out, and that is the fact that this is, we will maintain our primary station, which is located on Highway 151. We have a Station 2, which is out close to the Haywood County line that accesses the interstate. This would be our second substation. It would be fully staffed, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There would be a crew there. And it would basically improve our response time to not only the intermediate school, Hominy Valley Elementary, the Inga High School, as well as Inga Middle School, and San Diego Middle. So out of the schools in our district, by having a substation there, it will reduce response time to all those schools, 5 of the schools in my district.
Geographically, Max, where's the next closest?
The next,
Out of curiosity.
the next closest fire station,
Substation, fire station.
our main station's on Highway 151,
Okay. I know.
where you turn up, it's up there along the left.
That's the next closest.
That's the next closest.
It's close to the post office, isn't it?
So what used to be?
Passing, it's on the old post office.
Yeah, okay.
And we are recommending a lease, which my understanding is that's acceptable
That
to the
is
fire
acceptable.
district, not a sale, but a lease.
And the department would, it would be a brick and mortar facility. It would be something that would be complementary to the design and the appearance of the intermediate school. It wouldn't be something that would be harsh and something aesthetically not appealing. And the only other caveat to this is, right now, the property, that little outlier there, is sort of like a pie wedge, and our road, the road makes it look bent intermediate school, you make the loop and come back out. That road goes right through the middle of it. And they're looking at getting some plans to see how they would fit, or how the building would sit. And we're waiting to see that, but I would simply say they would also possibly request, possibly moving the road at the fire department's expense, if that becomes necessary. And the way that would go about is probably done over the summer break. But basically, they would build the road that they would need and just leave the other road passable and build a weekend when it's not tied in. That would be very little or minimal disruption to the traffic flow. Also, I've got a plat here, if anybody wants to see it, better, a little more detail. If you've got this, then you can see very easily on this, this little outlier right here. And quite honestly, if you see this long line that runs right here, that's an easement with Duke Energy. That's got some very high voltage kind of wire.
Underground?
It's overhead. You cannot build under that. So you can sort of see the dilemma. It's really a piece of property that's, I think the best and most valuable use of that property would probably be to have a small substation there with fire trucks and a full-time fire department there. I don't, it's sort of limited. Yeah.
I have 2 questions. So it looks on this little map like there's something there now. Is that something?
I believe that is just staging for construction.
Temporary construction.
Oh,
Department construction.
And then my other question, and this may be for later consideration, but just in terms of traffic, if there's a fire during drop-off or pickup times, is that going to be a concern?
That will have to be discussed and worked out in this
Right.
plan, obviously. Yeah, and so will the fact that, we have to have separate car and bus rider lines. So we'll have to discuss in detail where could we locate the roads.
And if cars
Because
are
the
backed
power
up and
lines
the fire
do-
truck has to get through.
Yeah, if you'll notice, the road does a little jog. The reason is there are those large transmission poles there, and that's why the road, so you can only build so close to those large transmission poles. But we can work all that out.
All right, we can't take action on this, but if I could just see if you wave at me that you think this is a good idea. Very good,
Or
thank you
send
very
it
much.
direction.
And-
We'll look into it.
Thank you.
And so now Mr. Campbell will go do his part. It is now time for Mr. Fearley. Again, I hope he sent down to drink some water. He needs,
I only have 140 slides.
and a good index finger.
This report is looking at existing conditions, basically from last fall, the best one of two membership numbers from August and September, well, into October, I should say. It's kind of a snapshot. So we look at permits for 2017. So it's not 100% up to date to today. The numbers you'll see for schools and such don't accurately reflect what's happening today in the school, and there are comings and goings. So I'll qualify it with that. And it's really a snapshot, and we're going to give you probably more than a month to look at it, have discussion, feedback to Dr. Baldwin before you consider and accept it. There is not a whole lot of action for you to take that we're recommending in here. You may deem that we need to do something, and if you ask staff to look into something, we're glad to do that based on their capacity versus the numbers and the trends and such. Glad to do that. The one action item that we'll ask you to approve ultimately will be to approve the first year of the long-range plan of actual projects, so that when the School Capital Fund Commission does make a call, that we can have something, a game plan, if you will, that you, the board, has approved, so if so we feel like we're not just out there making, doing guesswork. And I will qualify that to say that things may change between now and then. There's two items on that you'll see that there may be actual projects in there regarding school safety and security, and stuff happens in between. Roofs blow up, chillers blow up, you know, things happen, and so just bear with me. There may be some adjustment, but it's our best understanding of where we're at right now. So we'll look at these four things. I'm not going to go into the appendix. There is information in the back there that supplements and supports this. But we're going to look at membership. We're going to look at some trends and membership and capacity, I should say, and then that long-range planning component. So I used to present this kind of near the end. This is my big crescendo. Well, there it is. We're done. But it's gotten more complicated this year. But I'm kind of giving you the big thing, and then we'll just look at kind of how we got here and dig into some of the trends. We've been presenting this to you for years, but we've added in red the K-3 reduction as though it's in place right now. Okay, so that because it takes time to plan for these things. So we color code things. As you can see, green, we're in pretty good shape. Yellow is kind of cautionary. We're getting close to the capacity of the school. And orange is, we're doing a lot of coping mechanisms now to make it work. And then red is, wow, that could be hard to deal with. Now, I'll qualify that is that this red, orange, yellow, and green pretends there are no modulars on the site, okay? So when you see that heavy red down at Glen Arden, we all know that there are a lot of modulars there. So that's how we cope with those things. And you will see a correspondence between the red and the orange with, over here, the modular, the number of modulars on site. You will see that that's how we're dealing with it. So while you see that red, don't be too alarmed. Go look at the modular side, and if there's a lot of modulars there, we're doing okay. It's just we're using modulars, and they have issues. They're expensive to operate. The accessibility, the equity of the space, and all those good things are what come with modulars. So
Can you explain for the group, maybe it's coming on another slide, I looked at one thing, I didn't see it, again, the difference between your functional capacity and your
Yeah,
theoretic.
there's actually three capacities we look at. We kind of triangulate capacity. First of all, it's a moving target. It's a function of how we use the school. Capacities change. Even if you don't put an addition or you tear something down, the capacity will change. And you'll see we ask each principal each year to tell us how the school is being used. Because if a classroom, for example, is being used for a special needs class, that might have a 10-student capacity in there. But if it's a full class, it might have 18, if it's elementary, or 24. So our use of the school, and when we put different programs in, North Buncombe Middle now has some more special needs stuff going on. It's taken some space. It can reduce the capacity. So the idea is the theoretical capacity, the core study capacity, that's kind of the maximum. If you took every space in that school that looks like a classroom and could function like a classroom, let's make it a regular classroom.
And it has a
Maximum number of students in there, so that's kind of one end of the spectrum. And the DPI capacity is what we report to DPI every 5 years when they have a very strict formula. They compare it across the state, and it's kind of one size fits all. And so it's kind of the statewide. It's usually a number that's in between the theoretical and functional capacity. Not all the time, but functional capacity to me is the most accurate for Buncombe County schools. If you have funded a program, the county commissioners have funded a program that's beyond the core courses that are required, functional capacity says we need to provide a space for them, right? Music and PE and English as a second language. If you're going to fund a teacher, then we ought to give them a space they can operate out of. So
Really?
is
a novel
that a reasonable assumption? So functional capacity is more the Buncombe County Schools way, if you will. So that gives us a basis, and that's why when we kind of rate, we kind of use those as a triangulation, the high end and the low end typically in here. And when we know we're getting by theoretical Common Core, we know we have some issues, especially if we don't have modulars, but that is a coping mechanism. We can move modulars in. So here's all our schools. There they all are. This year's numbers that are the best one of two from the DPI's kind of facilities number. There are different best one of twos that you'll see are published and used by finance and personnel, but this is the kind of the DPI best one of two, so that we can compare for the last 15 years, that's the same number, and it seems to be more facilities related. So that's where we're at on that.
What do you mean by best?
The highest number of
Not worse.
students in the first 2 months of school. Because there's comings and goings, but then they cut it off there, and stuff happens after that, but it's the highest number within those first 2 months, okay? And then we project population, or membership rather, at each school for 5 years, and I'll qualify that too. The second year, probably going to be pretty accurate. The third year, not too bad. The fourth year, boy, things can really change, and the fifth year is a shot in the dark, okay? So when you see that red appearing at Fairview, for example, it tells us we better be aware something's going on there. Let's dig into the data and let's see what happens next year, because the direction, the trends that we're following, if they hold, that's where we're going to end up. We also look at the core capacities of schools, and we're in really good shape. We've addressed where we've maybe put a lot of classrooms on, but have never increased the classroom or the cafeteria size. Basically, the core is the cafeteria and the media center. It is not the administrative core. Media center, you can see we have TC in the yellow, but really with technology one-to-one, the media center isn't as critical to deliver what it does. It's not this big keeper of books and the only place you can find technology in the school. So DPI just hasn't, this is using the DPI standards for both. Cafeterias, however, if you have to do 3 or 4 seatings and start at 10 o'clock, and boy, we'll hear about that. And we're not in bad shape. I just talked to Estes about it again. They're the only one, but the configuration of their cafeteria that's been in there, it has these big corridors on the side. And by DPI standards, what you can count yields us this kind of cautionary area that it's not, but they're doing fine because they can kind of spread their wings a little bit beyond that. It's just for DPI reporting and such, I can't count that square footage. So we're in pretty good shape there. Utilization rate is basically the percentage of how efficiently we're using that school. And I will go to, you can see we've got a couple of schools up in the 110 and 111, Glen Arden and Fairview, and we're going to look at Fairview because, yeah, it has modulars, not to the extent of Glen Arden, but there's potentially some issues coming up at Fairview. So you get above that, above about 105, and it gets critical. I've only marked the ones on there that are above 95, where they're kind of getting into the cautionary zone. This is a study that was done last year to look at facility needs throughout the state. They sampled, Yancey was the county here, and they sampled 6 or 8 other ones and did a pretty thorough study to see what their needs really are, what their financing capability is, their conditions and such. So this is an excerpt from that study that you could look up and find if you're interested in it. But it talks about utilization here, and that's one of the factors they looked at. So you can see that 110, we have 2 schools kind of in that zone, but they both have a significant number of modulars. I've highlighted 95 and above, and below that, you've got adequate space. You're doing fine. You can move folks around, but you're going to be probably using some coping mechanisms here, double uses of space and all those creative things that our folks do to make it work. If you're down in here, you have a lot of extra space, but I have never been in a school where I walked in and saw a space not being used. They will use it. You build it and they will use it.
Really good.
Yeah.
Going back to the previous chart, help me understand, when I look at K-3 reduction capacity,
Okay.
and K-3 reduction utilization rate, specifically the reduction capacity. So when I see, let's just pick Bell as a top one, I see a number of 302, and looking at next year's projected, where it says 316, what do those 2 different numbers tell me?
Yeah, that tells me that that's in the orange zone there, that they're going to have to put a teacher on a cart potentially, an art teacher or something. Maybe they don't get their own room. They're going to have to be doing some things because we've reduced, now next year it doesn't fully reduce. This is, where's Cynthia, what year? 2 more years? When it goes to that 8.
Until 21, 22.
21, 22.
So this is 21, 22. Right now, yeah, it's inching down 1 student. That's where we're going. And I wanted to get it out there.
But
So-
the capacity means that when we reduce those class sizes with the current facility that we have in place, our number would be 302.
Yes.
As opposed to 316 or 322 or 324,
335. 335 is the number you should compare it to.
Okay.
So that's the effect of the
Still same
K-3
number of
reduction in that school.
So we in essence then are, in terms of classroom space, in that just that one particular example, we're short for 33 spots. Which is
a
what, a classroom and a half.
Yeah, class and a half.
I just want to make sure when I look at that,
And we as a staff have talked to the schools, and Cynthia did a survey last year, and we've identified schools that have the biggest concerns, and you know, we've looked at those and talked about what some of those coping mechanisms could be, and we've moved modulars to accommodate some of that. But it's still going to be a challenge, and maybe, Val, I don't recall that one in particular, but our principals are pretty creative on how to make things work.
Build them a conference room, then you're gonna put kids in there.
So you're not joking. That'll happen.
I know it. So when I look at the far right column, the K-3 reduction utilization rate,
Yeah,
that's the utilization rate for the 2021 number?
correct, and here's the
Here.
current one right now.
Uh-huh. So going
Boom.
down, like, it caught my eye.
And only elementary you can see. is-
Right. It caught my eye that all of them, the percentage rate goes up from functional to K-3, except for, there's one in North Buncombe District.
Up North Buncombe Elementary.
Yes, it's North Buncombe Elementary, and is that because we're projecting that their enrollment is going to be declining in the future, and that's why?
Oh, I don't know, you may have caught me.
Oh.
You do that every year. No, it's okay.
I'm in the ticker.
That's why, no, I appreciate it, and that's why we don't, I mean, this is hot off the presses, and there's a lot of data
But,
here.
but it does look like the numbers.
I am not
they
sure.
enroll- If you go to the left side, the numbers there are declining over time.
Yeah,
unlike
they
the
should,
others.
and they should, yeah.
So maybe that's why that declines, because by 2021, we project what the enrollment.
But not a lot less. I think there's an issue there that I just did not catch. And it may be a typo, it may be something in there's a lot of formulas that feed into this. And it takes as one mistype by Tim when his eyes are blurry and screws it
Well,
up.
I'm telling you, this T.C. Robertson situation at Avery's Creek, Glen Arden, and Estes is trouble.
Yeah. A lot of modulars at Glen Arden, we just moved one there. Is what?
It's troubling. I've got two conversations going on here, I'm sorry. I didn't hear what Pat said.
I said it's because of this, I was digging it.
Oh, okay, is that what it
It's because of
is?
the school board recommendation.
Is that what it is?
Everybody wants to come.
I think it's
That
because
wasn't
of
what I
the
meant,
construction
but
that's
that's-
going on out there is what I think.
You can go with that. That sounds better than what I.
Remember you changed the attendance
We
lines for
did.
those schools a couple of years ago to relieve Avery's Creek, and of course it pushed more kids to Estes and Glen Arden. You've allowed kids that were already in the system to stay through discretionary release, to stay at the school they're at, but a bunch of kids that moved, and new ones, they all go to this re-attendance organization. It did help. We were in a critical situation at Avery's Creek. So it was a good short-term solution. How it plays out in the long term, it's hard to tell.
It is.
It maybe those other schools, you know, there's a big development that gets a lot of kids. It's really hard to tell.
It's interesting to watch Woodfin move into an orange space.
It's such a small school, Barnesville. Boy, it takes one family and all of a sudden the whole school utilization rate changes.
Right.
And it's hard to predict, you know.
This is always so interesting to me, and I appreciate all the work that goes into it. Those of us that have been in school. Yeah.
There is a lot of information there. We had lost kids, 300, and we'll see later. Every surrounding school system has. Even Asheville City, that was predicted to go up, has lost 74. Yeah, you'll see that. Okay? So that's some good nighttime reading. And really, it is out here as a document to look at, to question if you pick up anything. We're not asking you to approve it now, accept it, I should say. You're not approving it, you're accepting it. So I do appreciate your eyes on it, and if you catch anything, or it's a planning document. So we talked about utilization rate, and I'm going to show you, we're going to focus on Fairview a little bit. How did we get to those Fairview numbers? That was a schoolway identified as an issue with the K-3 reduction. And one thing that has played out well for us on the K-3 reduction that has helped us at several schools and will help us at Fairview is going one-to-one, we're able to steal a computer lab for either, and they're usually bigger rooms than a classroom, so we can often get a classroom plus maybe a breakout room for a specialist. And there is funding in here to begin that at Fairview to take over that classroom, because they do need it. So we ask every year, every school, every principal, they love it, to come through and tell us the use of every single room in that school. It's really valuable for us, especially if they call and say the 5th grade wing. Well, sometimes, you know, things flop around. I can see what's current, but it helps us calculate the capacity, look at the use, and plan, really. So the principal filled that out, and then we feed that into the numbers this year. DPI gives us that best 1 of 2, and we see where each grade level and what they are this past year, 2007, fall of 17, best 1 of 2, and we go all the way back to 97. So we can see some pretty good trends here of the 1st grade, how many kids were in each 1st grade, because I've got to predict, or in kindergarten rather, I got to predict each year how many kids are going to be in each kindergarten. That's the other kids, at least, the other grades. I know there was this many in this grade and they may move on. So you can see, and you may take exception. This is the subjective part of it. But I talked to this principal, how many kindergarten registrations had you have? It's subjective, and I've chosen these numbers for the next 5 years that are going to plug in. And you can see, if I would have made that prediction this year, they had 138. The last year would have been just below, well below, and then it goes up. So it varies like crazy at all these schools, and that's a tough one to predict. But I try to look at the averages over time and maybe give more weight to the 3-year average than these. Try to see if there's trends in there. And then what this side does is looks at the how the kids advance. We call it Cohort Survival. It's kind of a bad term, but it was developed by a previous person, and I continue to use it. Cohort Survival, how you go from one grade to the next. So Fairview, the reason I brought this up, not just because it is in the red zone and has a concern, but they have a very interesting characteristic in that Cohort Survival. You can see this in 2014, the kindergarten was 101. The next year it went to 104, 106, then 109. So they're increasing as they move along, and that trend is very consistent. Here's the percentages over 10 years. From K to 1, 115%. That's a trend. That's common. That is happening for years. The last 3 years, 116, and you can see it. It's all over 100% for all the grade levels at Fairview. So when you give a kindergarten class, it grows by the time they're in 5th grade. And then that plugs into this. You can see there's a lot of formulas in this, and someone way smarter than me developed this. I just utilize it. But this tracks then those percentages of what would happen. And here's my predictions in yellow of what that advancement will be from K to 1, 1 to 2 throughout. And I'm looking at the averages of 3 years. Oh, it's 101. Pretty consistent. K to 1 was, over the years, so I chose 101. And this is subjective, and it may be a function of development in the area as well. There's a lot of development. I may see those averages and I'll put it up just a little bit. The tricky thing about development is kids don't enter at kindergarten. They could come in at 3rd, 4th, 5th. They could be high school kids. How do we know? I don't know. It's the best guess, and that's why those numbers get, if you make a guess here in kindergarten, it can be way off by 5 years. So
They could be retirees when they're kids off.
can be, what is the character of that development, exactly. So then that feeds into this spreadsheet that we can see next year's, or this year's, here where we were, and then this is our predictions for the coming years. So it uses those numbers, applies that cohort survival rate, applies the kindergarten, there's that 118 kindergarten, and then that's how we predict every 5 years. Here's those cohort survival rates that I had in yellow that I'm predicting. So that's how it works. And Fairview has this, a lot of schools have several grade levels that increase over time. Fairview seems to be really consistent for many years. So DPI has projected every school system in the state. Most of them just look just like Buncombe County for public school system. They have this dip. Asheville City is one of the exceptions, but again, they lost 74 this year, so that didn't really hold out. So I kind of triangulate that. I'm looking at what DPI is saying, what my predictions are. If something's way off, I'm going to go dig back into those formulas and see what's going on. And then I have a number of summary slides for you to look at if you have insomnia, but I think they're really instructive. And we've highlighted the schools with the largest gains from last year and the schools with the highest losses from last year. Again, Fairview hits it. Glenarden and Estes hit it too, and of course Nesbitt does because they added a senior class. You'll see high schools have a lot of drop-off. Well, there's a few reasons for that. There's a lot of options in high school. You have community high, you've got the early and middle colleges, you have Nesbitt Discovery Academy siphoning off some kids each year from those schools, as many as 20 to 25 in some of the districts. You have virtual school. There's a number of reasons for the high school, but typically we do see a bump from 8th grade to 9th grade.
Bump up?
A bump up. Typically we do. That's a very common pattern. And then here's a summary slide. You can see what's happening kind of around us. Asheville High lost 21, and here's a bunch of the city schools. They've developed a primary school that I can't tell you exactly what it is, but it is over there in West Asheville, and that's the first year I've seen that from city schools. They got Montford North Star Academy starting, but all in all, they lost 74. And then these are the charter schools, and these two here are the virtual schools. So these two are statewide numbers you're seeing, okay? Those two right there, statewide. The rest of these are local, so you can see what's happening there. And the charter schools are sometimes adding grade levels. And we have transfers out, and we have discretionary releases and such. So this looks at transfers out. Again, we've highlighted the schools with the highest transfers out for you, and we've identified where they're going. So at Anka Intermediate, which is right near Franklin, yeah, there was 18 kids that went to Franklin, and 4 that went to Invest, which is just down the road as well. So that kind of makes sense that locally they're there. But you can see this, but you also have to look at the transfers in a couple of slides and kind of almost look at them parallel, because some have high transfers out and high transfers in. So just bear that in mind. This is looking at a trend of grade level transfers, and this is the same pattern that I've seen for the last few years. 6th grade is typically the highest level of transfers out of Buncombe County schools.
So this is out?
This is out, yes.
Out.
And they typically, yeah, 6th grade, biggest one. And where are they going? Okay, this is another way of showing that information. Charter schools are individually shown. You can see city schools on it. Charter schools are the biggest when you add them all up together, but they're individually shown. They're bigger than the private parochial. we gather, when a student wants to transfer, there's usually a request for their records, and we know where they're going. That's how we track that. And then another way of showing that information graphically, at what grade levels do kids go to these other opportunities here? And you see they're all a little bit different of where they go. Asheville City Schools, Asheville High has a lot of programs at the high school that we do, you know, multiple bands and things, and that may explain, you know, a little higher number there, a little bump from other grade levels. Of course, people move around in jobs, and there's a lot of reasons for going back. And then you have on the other side discretionary admissions and releases, where you're kind of moving around within the public school system for various reasons that are the accepting principal and the releasing principal must sign off on it. And I'll point out that Fairview, again, kind of hits it pretty high, and I would project that that is one of the reasons why Fairview has that increase in cohort survival, because we do seem to get a lot of discretionary admitted students. The Glen Arden and Estes may be explained by that change of attendance. So you can, I want to stay in the school I'm already in. I'm not going to, you assign me to a different school, and you as a board made a policy to allow that if you're already in the system. So perhaps that's why those are as high as they are. Then transfers in. So some of the schools that had big transfers out, you got to kind of look at this, and you can see where they're going or where they're coming from. So yeah, Franklin was quite a few, but we see some of them coming back. It's a lot of information. I'm trying to show you in different ways, and you're going to have to kind of absorb it and see it. You're not going to get it all right here. So if there's not any questions on that, I'll move on to permits and development in the area. So for the second year in a row, the North Buncombe district has the highest number of permits. Last year it was really close, but this year, yeah, they got the highest number. Typically, Robertson has been the highest for a few years before that, but North Buncombe is right there with them. Fairview keeps coming up. Fairview just keeps coming up. So that could lead into an issue, a concern about Fairview when that K-3 hits in full force.
Are these SFR permits, or they include multifamily?
There's multifamily and single family. This does not include Asheville City permits, okay? Buncombe County is really easy to get the permits, and city's a little bit harder to figure that out. So there's, you know, we do have schools in the city limits, so.
So like Hog Creek, Johnson, whatever, you're not.
Glen Arden, yeah. So we're not seeing the city permits, city building permits in here. So, and this gives you just a little more graphic way of looking at that based on attendance zone and such of the elementary, so you can see what they are. Kind of interesting that, yeah, North Buncombe had the most, but there's no multifamily permits. Very interesting. And there's one other. Oh, Reynolds had no multifamily permits that we saw from 2017. January 1st to December 31st is what the time period is for these permits.
There may be within the city, in the Reynolds district, for instance.
Yep, there could be. The city has a big swath in there.
It's interesting, there's several of those going on the multifamily units, there's several going up. And
If they permitted last year, they're not going to show up.
They're already.
And what we've seen, there are multiple phases of those projects that were permitted last year that it looks like they cleared out this, but they've only built this. So it looks like this trend will continue because it looks like there's another spot for a bunch more. So long-range planning, when we use that term, these are typically larger projects that the Article 4042 in the book just find like too big to manage. And so there's special projects, typically larger projects, and they would use lottery or the Article 39 funds to make them happen. And we used to have a 10-year plan, used to come and ask you to approve the first year of that plan, and we did that work. Now, what we're looking for is a list of projects to go before the School Capital Fund Commission to request funding for. So there's no guarantee that any of it would happen. And the effect of that in the capital outlay book was when the capital outlay committee saw a project like that and thought it was really important, we highlighted it, and maybe it got more, it rose higher in this long-range plan. There was more of an assurance that it might get done in our lifetime. Now it's, roll the dice. We just don't know what'll happen.
The board members and public, if you have interest, the projects and where they are in terms of funding and status that the School Capital Fund Commission, there's a website on the County of Buncombe government website that is specifically, not a website, there's a link that's specifically set up for these projects. So you can go in at any time and see that, X project is 20% complete and 80% complete, whatever, in both school systems. So you can see all those projects.
Yeah, we request as we are making pay applications, they're seeing the progress we're making on the project, and I probably assume that once the money's gone, it's 100% done. Sometimes we have to supplement those projects because they overran in cost. Sometimes we have some funds left, and that reverts back to the School Capital Fund Commission. The School Capital Fund Commission did develop a kind of a criteria, and they asked us to show them how our projects apply to those 4 criteria there for their consideration. And that goes to the county commissioners with the recommendation. In your appendix that we're not going to go into, there is a much more detailed listing of projects individually. This is kind of a summary chart. There's only what we think will be between 10 million and 11 million available for city and county schools for the next 2 years. So our year 1 total of requests of 7.3 million probably is not going to get funded. That would leave Asheville City with 2.5 million, and they have some big needs there. So this will change. This will change a bit exactly the priority and what those projects are, but it's at least gives us a planning tool so that we can go to the School Capital Fund Commission and we can look at those projects more carefully. We can cost them out more carefully in real time. The projects down at, in year 5, we're going to do looser estimates, if you will, because it takes a lot of time to guess what they would be, and then with inflation, it's hard to know what those costs will really be. But at least we got a working list to work on. 5 years, 65.3 million. Probably is an underestimate of what our needs will really be, because some things will happen in between. Roofs don't get better over time. Things happen. And so another level of detail, here's a listing of the projects, but again, in the appendix is a much more detailed version of this. But as we know it now, not in priority order, but those are the projects we are listing for years 1 to 5 in various categories, and this is a place where your input would be valuable. What's high priority and what's low? we've broken it into these categories because it's really important to at least peck away at all these categories. So while you could never make the case that school safety was less important than a paving project, if we don't peck away at those projects, and roofing and paving are probably the two big ones that if you don't get them in time, roofing, if you let it wreck your roof deck, you have a major costly project. In paving, if you just let it go so far that you have to go that deep below the pavement to fix it, that's going to be a 3 times more costly project. So we try to make educated decisions to offset those potential really high maintenance costs. So when we do our requests, we try to grab at least one item from each of these categories each year to put in the mix so that we don't get too far behind in any of them.
Tim?
Yes.
So on this list, I see Haw Creek to convert from open plan. I see prioritize school security improvements, and I see phased renovations to school entrances. And all those things seem to be security related.
They are security
So do you
related.
pull some of them out for a particular reason? Is there bigger projects, or why?
A lot of it is what we've talked about. We think we really need to do this stuff. Maybe we don't even need a study to do it, but I don't know where we'll be in that planning process, but we know we need to do something with Haw Creek.
Right.
So I put it in there.
Right.
We know we have several school entrances that could really use a reconfiguration, and we know how to do it and what it would take. It's just so costly to do. And is that a higher priority than this school or that school? So they're not listed really individually, that particular category, like some of the others. It's generic right now. Hopefully benefit from going through a planning process, whatever that process may be. And then the last section here, maintenance has been working very hard. Alicia is going to help us. You're going to present. I'm not presenting for you.
Hi.
She's going to give you an update on the energy savings projects they've been working hard on. And that will conclude it after Alicia is done, so feel free to ask questions.
Deborah, afterwards. No? Okay. So we'll try to make
got
it
one more?
nice and quick.
Oh, yeah, for the.
Well, is that a laser pointer? Thank you. I'll try to go relatively quickly. I just have a couple slides. Most of you know me. If you don't, my name is Alicia Reardon. I'm the energy manager for the school system. I'm just going to highlight the projects that we're working on this year and talk about some of the energy savings and not get into avoided costs right now since we haven't hit the end of the year and I feel like it's premature to do that. So with that said, the projects that we have going on this year, I'm sure you all have heard about the countywide LED initiative. It's going really well. I think we're on to our 16th building. We're working in the Robertson district right now. Just finished TCR, and that felt like a building we would never get out of. So when we finally did, we were really excited. Irwin district was complete in the fall, and our crew of guys is working in Coops Intermediate at the moment. And then we should be, I'm thinking June, early June, maybe mid-June, we'll be in the Enka district. So we're rolling along pretty quickly, and it's a lot of lights. If y'all are ever interested in coming out to see what they're doing, let me know, and I would be glad to take you on tours. Some other lighting projects that we have going on, they're listed here, but we're basically, each year we're trying to tackle some high energy usage lighting that we have in the district in addition to, it's hard to, I'd be getting in the weeds if I explained the different types of lighting, but there's a lot of different kinds of lighting. So we have a lot going on in that realm. We're trying to improve the look of our schools. and reduce energy. And as you can see, if you can just clicker around, I don't have before pictures, but if you've been in TCR lately, it looks really good. The buildings that are being retrofitted have a fresh, new, cleaner look. Bless you. The older fluorescent lighting had a yellow hue to it, so this is just a crisper, cleaner look.
And the teachers like it?
They do, they do. You can never make everyone happy,
Oh,
for
really?
sure.
I think the majority,
Yes.
you know, it's kind of like air conditioning, how many people here cold, raise your hand.
Right.
How many people are hot, so.
Yes.
This is a full, because people ask me a lot, why does it cost so much? I'm not just changing out bulb, this is full ballast.
Oh, yeah, we're taking the
The
whole,
whole
Yes.
thing comes out new, and I think that's important to,
Yes.
you know it, we know it.
Yes.
I know it because I've heard you talk about it at SCFC, but it's the ballast, it's,
Yes.
and there's a lot of those in every room and every school, it just takes a lot.
It's pretty incredible. Yeah. Next slide. So this slide just highlights some of the other non-lighting based projects that we have going on. Down here you can see we have 6 solar panels going up on the roof. They're actually there, obviously, already at Irwin High, and those are solar hot water, so they will offset the need for natural gas to heat the water for the kitchen there, so that's pretty cool. When we can and when we prioritize that we need new large equipment like chillers and boilers, we make sure that we're putting in extremely energy efficient equipment. So we're really good about that. We're not just changing it out because we feel like it. We know it's come to the end of its life cycle, and we're choosing products that will serve us well in the long run financially. We're upgrading our building automation systems in a lot of our buildings because 6 or 7 of them or so have very old DOS systems that don't give us a lot of control. So these newer systems will allow us to have more granular control rather than zonal control of our buildings, which in the end helps us save energy and money. We've been working with technology to find a solution for our modular units because they are controlled and that they have a thermostat like your home would that we program. Literally manually, we have to go to each one. We have, I think, around 110 thermostats out there. So anytime we want to make a change, we have to get in the county vehicle and drive to that thermostat, unlock it, make the change, and lock it again. So last summer, we spent about a week, a team of us, going to the modulars, shutting them down for the summer, and going back in the fall and turning them back on, which takes a lot of time. And we're losing a lot of opportunity to save that energy on holidays, snow days that aren't work days when no one's there, whereas with our building automation systems, we can log into that system and make those changes easily. So we need a solution like that for our mobile units because we have 100 of them. It's a lot of square footage. So we found coincidentally a program with Duke Energy that will give us these Wi-Fi thermostats. It'll give us a dashboard that we can log into and control all of these thermostats, and it's free. Sort of the clincher was it wasn't necessarily the ideal, and it's getting into the weeds, but the ideal technology setup for our IT team, but we worked it out, we're working together, and we all agreed that we can make this happen. So the neat thing about it is that we will have better control of our mobile units, and we'll save energy, and we don't have to spend any money to get that. So that's very exciting. We can't trim our heating and cooling schedules all that much, but when we can, we're always evaluating that and looking for ways to do that. Sometimes we can look at seasonally when we're charged more, when we're on peak or when we're off peak. And there are opportunities, say, if peak starts at 6 a.m., we might start our equipment at 5:45 so that we're not slamming our meters right during peak time, firing up all our equipment. So we're trying to think about stuff like that.
And of course, we have an amazing account rep with Duke Energy, and we meet with him every year, make sure we're on the best rates for all of our different accounts. But it also gives us an opportunity to identify errors in our billing. And I'm sure there are more, but for example, we found a $5,000 charge that was incorrect, that Duke Energy has credited us for. We found area lights where we were being charged for metal halides at a higher rate, and they didn't even exist anymore. So we find these things, get them fixed, and get the school system credited. So I'll try to speed it up a little bit. I just wanted to show you this. It's a lot and it's small from far away, but this is Buncombe School's historical energy use trend over the last decade or so. So this is back in 2006 and all the way up to present. The line shows you the combined trend for all utilities such as electric, natural gas, fuel oil, and propane. So it's just a good graphic because you can see through this 10 years how we've had major jumps up and some jumps, or major jumps down, some bumps up, which is also seasonal, but we're trending down. So that's something I just wanted to show you so you can see that.
Can you go back to that slide?
Sure. And
But it's not the entire state though.
No, but I don't see, you've got fuel oil and propane. We still using fuel oil and propane in some
Yes,
cases?
we have fuel, Western Barnesville, and Pisgah.
Above
Propane,
ground, above ground,
underground. Brand new underground, well, I say brand new underground tanks, they're new underground tanks, state of the art. Have a lot of fuel.
And I noticed that there are, over time, I've noticed there's a lot more natural gas lines being run around Buncombe. How expensive is it? Is it cost prohibitive if one lines up in front of Barnesville Elementary? Because natural gas is going to be a less expensive way.
We would change immediately. Our boilers, all of our boilers can burn natural gas. They have a natural gas burner.
So it's not cost prohibitive to make that change? Because you've got the line only going to the road. We would have to have the expense of connecting from there into the building. Is that correct? But it's not a high, or
It's
what
not a
they
high
call it?
cost. They would run that for us.
Okay.
And we were hoping to run that when you run the Lester, along with water.
Are they running it?
Not yet.
Yeah, we're working on it. We're still working on it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So these two graphs are showing you, I wanted to expand it out of just this fiscal year because it's just a short period of time. So I went ahead and pulled the data for natural gases on the left, electricity's on the right, just to show you our trend for the past year, basically. Red is this year and blue is last year. So you can see we're also creatures of habit for the most part. So of course it's warmer during these months. We're going to use less natural gas during the year and it's going to spike in the winter time. But what I wanted to show you about this is that we used a lot of natural gas this winter, well above last year, and that's because we had such a cold winter compared to last year. In contrast, and I'll kind of go into that a little bit more on the next slide, but in contrast, our electricity since last spring, we're generally minus this summer, and I'll explain that, and this winter, I'll explain that as well. We're under where we were last year for the most part. Again, especially in these shoulder months, it works out really well for us. But this winter, of course, we're primarily using natural gas, but you're also running pumps and motors and other mechanical equipment to run boilers and everything around these buildings. So the cold affected us there too. And then in the summertime, we've historically not run air conditioning in our buildings. 2 summers ago we did, but last summer we ran it even a little bit longer. So no matter what, we're going to see that impact because we used to never do it. Any questions about that? So this gets a little nerdy on my part, but that's okay. So this is also natural gas in red, with heating degree days overlaid on top of it, this darker line. Heating degree days are just a way to show you how cold it was, and the colder it is, the harder our buildings have to work to stay warm, and the more energy they use to stay warm. So this is the last 3 years, this being this year. And it makes sense, the heating degree days are gonna be higher when it's gonna follow, what the weather's doing and when it's colder. But you can see that this year, it was just significantly colder. So we had a rough winter. I think it was in January when we had to run our equipment 24 hours a day for almost 2 weeks, just to prevent, equipment failure, pipes from breaking, all that good stuff. So this is my last slide. So why do we do this? In part, if we weren't doing this, we'd be in a much worse financial situation. Energy conservation, saving that energy, saving those funds, avoiding costs, helps reduce our operating costs, because there are some things we can control and some things that we cannot. Several of our utility rates went up this year. We can't do anything about that. So in light of that, it helps balance out what's happening when we can't control it. Otherwise, we're stuck with, we have a budget, the rates go up, and we just have to pay more. So it's almost like a teeter-totter and a balancing act. We're saving it, and they're charging us more. So in the end, it does really help us, because we would just have to keep increasing our budget. We can't control the weather, unfortunately. And we've added new buildings to our school system. So what's cool is that all these factors involved, we've either kept our usage the same or in most cases reduced it. So that's pretty cool. And that's about all I have. Do you have any questions?
I appreciate those,
One quick question, all of the bulbs that are coming out, I assume those are T12 bulbs, those fluorescent 4-foot bulbs?
They're mostly T8s.
T8's
Yeah.
even better. Are we trying to find a way to repurpose those, give them, rather than just going to the,
They're being recycled.
okay, that's fine.
Yeah, they're being, they have to be by state or
And
federal
most
law.
of them are at their end of
Yeah.
life also. I mean,
Yeah,
pick through some, you may get a handful of decent bulbs out, but they're still used bulbs. They
Yeah.
are all being recycled.
but we are also, when we go to the school, because the schools stockpile boxes of fluorescent lamps in their closets and dark corners. So when we go in, because we don't want them to put a fluorescent lamp in an LED design. These don't have lamps, but it's getting into the weeds. But some of the lamps that we're taking care of, it looks the same, but it's not, it's LED. So we don't want them to make that mistake. So we're going in and talking to the custodians and saying, hey, please collect up your boxes, we will take them. And then we're distributing those to the schools that haven't been done yet, that, are 6 months away from now, so.
any other questions?
The trends on the historical energy use, so this is 10 years, 2007 through 17, and there's not anything in here. When new schools have come online, they've been included in here.
That's correct.
Yes.
So while there's a trend going down, it's probably, if you actually compare just the schools that have been in existence
Yeah.
over that 10-year period, the whole time, you might even see a bigger dip.
Yeah.
Well, we need to overlay square footage over
Yeah.
that, so you can see how, there's a trend in square footage increase.
Right.
But,
It's system-wide square footage.
yes,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you've got to look at if you look at our energy data for 1 month, you'll get freaked out. Because,
Depending on the month.
well, depending on the month, I mean, the cold weather or something, you think, oh my gosh, we spent a lot, but you got to look at it as a whole year, because it's,
But that to me is good.
It's amazing.
It's amazing to me because of the
being able
number of
to.
buildings, and not just buildings, but full school plants that we've added in 2006, 7, 8.
I'm always tickled to get your email. I don't always understand what it says, but I'm tickled to get your
Well,
email.
we're hoping that, in the near future, future, we're working on some changes that those might be a little more user
Like
friendly.
this one that came today with this report.
We won't get into any cohorts or survival rates or anything. We like pictures.
But I appreciate what you do. It's a phenomenal task. Money bags comes on.
1,866. And part of that 1,866 does represent the 2 virtual charter schools that we have. And we don't have to pay, we have to pay $65.34 a month for them because it's just bricks and mortar. We don't have to pay all the other stuff because it's virtual. So, a little different calculation on that. But there's less than 100 students that we pay for that, so. Another thing that will show this trend changing, so currently, as of April 2018, our revenue streams are 64% is state public school funds, 30% is local, and 6% is federal. Last year, those numbers were 63, or 67% was state, 27% was local, and federal remained the same at 6%. So there you go, is that trend that as the state amount declines, locals having to pick up the difference. Somebody might ask, where does all this money go? People. 90% of those 3 funding sources goes to pay for our people. That only leaves 10% for all the other stuff. Last year, that number was 89% and 11%. So, you know, we're protecting our people because it's in the best interest of our students. I think it's important to know that there are 5 classifications of fund balance. Somebody might look at this right here and say, wow, you got $10 million, why don't you use it? Well, it's just not that easy. 2 of those categories, the non-spendables and the restricted by state statute, are non-negotiable. That's we can't touch it. It's not in the prepaids and inventories. It's required. And then, of course, that state statute is part of the budget balance resolution, so we can't touch that. We're also bound by board policy 8100 for this stabilization amount, which is the committed amount. And so unless that policy changes, that is protected. So basically, what we have left is the assigned fund balance. And as you all know, we assign the fund balance for the subsequent year's expenditures. You'll see in 2013-14, we did have $827,000 of unassigned fund balance. I will attribute that to the fact that the R money, the state stabilization money that we got from that 3 period helped us enhance that. And if you populate that on the graph, that's what it looks like. That green area was the unassigned fund balance. And then you can see board policy 8100 has been pretty stable. And that amount is equal to 1/12 of our operational budget that we keep bound by that policy.
Go back a slide.
I sure can.
I want to make sure I understand, because Ms. Franklin loves this big old country boy from Georgia, who doesn't know much better. I have to ask this question. So as I look at this, when I hear the term fund balance, I think of savings account. But assigned monies for 16, 17, $4,125,550. Now, there's not a balance. That's money that's
That money is
allocated
appropriated.
and appropriated and spent.
That money is actually, that $4.125 million is actually appropriated in our 17-18 budget. That is a revenue source for us to balance our
So
local
it's
budget.
gone.
It's gone.
Is it
So-
gone, or is it there for when we need it in this year? I mean, it's not necessarily spent already.
It's not spent already, but based on projections, it will probably be spent.
It's a budgeted item
It
that's
is a
gone.
budget
So
item.
when I look at fiscal year 16, 17, a $10,600,506 number at the bottom total, that's not a true picture.
That is correct, and that's
Of
the
what
reason
we
for
have
this.
to work
Absolutely,
with.
absolutely. We do not have $10 million that we can just appropriate because it is protected by certain things.
And the committed, board policy 8100, in this particular most recent year, $5,647,000, is There for a number of reasons, I think, but help me if I'm wrong. Number one, emergencies. Number two, cash flow.
That's correct, absolutely.
Those bills come and go, and the money comes and goes, not necessarily all at the same time. Those are the two major areas that we've basically said, Dr. Ball, you've been around longer than I have, but we've said, that's a month.
It's operating.
It's a month operation. It's a month's operation of the county fund balance, or of the county funding, not of the full budget.
That's correct. This, and that's the reason I preface this by saying, this is just our Fund 2 local current expense, and that represents just that.
So the picture, do we do ourselves a disservice in the way we present this picture? In that, I just glance, if I'm Joe Schmo in the corner and I just glance at this, or if I've got a motive and I want to talk about things that they're sitting over there with all this money, all I'm going to do is look down at the total and go 10,600,000, they're holding $10 million. And that's not factual.
That is not factual.
And so I'm wondering, are we hurting ourselves some, or is this the required way we've got to actually show this based upon state statute and accounting principles and those kinds of things?
This is how we have to present. This is exactly how it is in our comprehensive annual financial report.
So it's important for us to understand it so that if we have questions.
And they are the ones that categorize these classifications. They come up with the terminology.
So that we can properly answer questions.
But I just wanted everyone to know that we don't just have $10.6 million out there to use. It is, restricted by state statute or policy. So, does that answer your question?
Yes.
The thing that I don't understand is why the past 3 years, there's been a healthy figure under prepaids, and that's blank this year.
So I can answer that.
Okay, you can.
So in fiscal year 2013-14, we prepaid health insurance. When we make health insurance payments, like the payment we made for April pays for May's premiums. So there was enough consensus and cash to do that. So a prepayment was made in June of that year to pay for the health insurance premiums for July.
So prepaids always happen in June? But, oh, I see, and the last one is 16-17, that's not even this year that we're looking at.
Right.
Last column.
Yeah.
So they're,
Right.
Prepaids are in June because at the end of
Right.
June, it has to roll over
Right.
to a new year.
and so why were there no prepaids then in 16-17? Because there wasn't money there to do it? Is that?
Well, we just took care of all that. So what we do is so our fiscal year ends June 30th, but transactions don't stop.
Right.
So for July, August, and September, we basically operate in arrears. And so anything that comes in that we pay in July, August, and September, but it was for the previous fiscal year, we have to tie it back into that fiscal year. So we just didn't have anything that fell into that category. Now, chances are in 17, 18, there'll probably be some prepaids. It was just how it flowed. So, but that's the reason that number was so great in 13-14 is because we prepaid the health insurance. Because they basically require you to pay it by July 5th or 6th, so your health insurance coverage doesn't stop.
So she doesn't go on vacation that first weekend in July.
I do not. So again, back to the graph, I think it just shows the layers and the trends in how the flow from 2013-14 to present, or from last year has gone. So now we'll talk about the heart of our presentation and why, what we're asking. This is new money from the county. So this will be an increase from existing appropriations. So basically, all we have to go on right now is the second year of the budget bill. That's it. General Assembly's not coming back into session until May 16th. You all know all this is due on May the 15th or before. So we're doing our proposal and information on the best information at hand. So right now, in the budget bill, it is suggested that the certified personnel will receive an average of 4% pay increase. And what is helpful to know is that we have 712 full-time equivalents. That's more bodies, but there's 712 full-time equivalents that we pay out of local funds. So we always, whatever the state pay rate is, that's what we give to our locally funded people, because they don't know where they're paid from. That's just, a budget thing. So, that could be 1,400 people, because we have a lot of part-time positions. So, but there's 712 full-time equivalents, and there's probably 4,600 full-time equivalents that we pay. So that would be the locally funded certified personnel. So we're estimating that to be a cost of $694,000. For non-certified, there's absolutely positively nothing in the budget bill for pay increase for this group of people. But in years past, we have been given some type of bonus, or maybe we got a % pay raise in this year. So to be due diligent, I think it would, we need to put something in there. Like I said, there's no guidance that we have from anybody. So for that group of people, the cost would be $728,000. So just for the pay increases, we're looking at 1.4 million there.
It goes back to continuing to be a timing problem.
Absolutely. This is best guess and could change.
And it's crystal ball. We think two factors are very important to make sure that we include that. Number one, it's an election year. Number two, we do know that there's a surplus with state revenue. So put both of those together for us not to include. And then once the timing occurs and we finally do know what the state budget is, if we've not requested this, we now have 14% of our staff, certified staff, that we're going to have to find funding from some source.
Right. And you saw those fund balance numbers.
So if the commissioners say, well, we want our funds to pay for an equal increase for the non-certified personnel as the certified personnel, that would be inequitable, because the state funds that are funding the other positions, we are guessing are going to be, it has to be equitable with whatever the state does.
Absolutely.
So the commissioners can't say, we want everything to be even if the state funding positions are not.
Unless they give us money to fund us,
Oh,
increase the state.
Right.
And federal, you gotta include federal.
There you go, right.
So, our state, our local budget mirrors the state, so we are equitable, we're equitable in all of it, but we fund the same amount.
Because I know this is a concern, at least for several of the commissioners, in terms of different levels of pay increase for certified versus non-certified.
Absolutely.
Want to take care of everybody.
And historically, the certified pay increase has always been larger. I don't know why, but it has, and that's just.
And then that just gets wider and wider.
It does. You end up with your scales here, so, and it's hard to catch up. So for retirement and health insurance, this is suggested in the budget bill. So big change there. The matching retirement rate currently is 17.13%. Is suggested to go to 18.44. That's huge. That's a huge increase. So we're anticipating that cost to be $713,000. Health insurance premium, again, currently $58.69, suggested to go to $61.04, so that's $235 per year per 712 full-time equivalent, so that's $167,000. So just for the benefits, that's $880,000 that we're asking for, and these I consider continuation items. I basically classified these in 3 categories: continuation, expansion, and sustainability. So this is where we get into our component of expanding items that currently are not in our local budget. And this is helping with promoting school safety, enhancing that. And so this position here, this is a coordinator of behavioral health and community engagement. This would add up to 3 positions in the student services department, with that being the first one. So the cost of that, and no, that's the cost, not the salary, that's the cost of this person, which includes local supplement, the whole benefits, all those benefit rates that we talked about on the previous slide. So that's $102,258. And really, that's just a few of the responsibilities that this position will help and, again, this is to help enhance school safety. And I'm not gonna read all this to you, but you all can see what that name, like I said, that's just part of the responsibilities. 2 more positions in student service would be adding 2 behavioral outreach specialists. Currently, we have 4 of those positions. Adding these 2 would have 1 for every district, which is good. So the cost for those is $79,080 a piece. So for 2 of those, it would be $158,000. And again, it would work with the coordinator and to enhance existing programs just to help increase school safety across our district. Another request that we're making for, well, now we're in sustained
Can I just back
operations.
you up for a minute?
Absolutely.
So you said in your words, but not on the slides, that this is very clearly related to school safety.
Absolutely.
And is that gonna go in writing to the commissioners, or are they just gonna have to pick up on it when somebody says it? I mean, it seems like it's very important for them to hear, to see, and not just hear, that this is directly related.
We can absolutely add it to the PowerPoint, because I think this is part of the PowerPoint we're going to use for our presentation there, so absolutely. And we will
I
certainly
think
stress
sort of
that.
bold and red and
Flashing,
flashy.
I'll be very good,
Yes.
yeah, with some flashing.
Whatever we
Absolutely,
can
I
do.
mean, I don't make light of the situation, because this
Yeah.
is very critical.
And the other thing that you said that is not here is that this will then give us one of these behavioral health outreach specialists in each district.
Yes, we can add that too.
That's critical for them to hear.
Okay,
These are
absolutely.
boots on the ground, and I'll be doing the presentation in the session to the commissioners, and I promise you, that will be under safe schools. In fact, that's a component, that whole aspect in the governor's budget is a component for mental health. And you see, we have a change in terminology, not mental health per se, but behavioral health. But you've heard me say over and over, I brought every one of our principals in this room, and we asked them, what is the #1 concern? They put it under an umbrella of mental health. So again, these are individuals that will go into classrooms, coordinator, training across the district, and connecting, because we cannot do this by ourselves. We have got to connect with support services outside of the school system.
And I think it's great that we're moving towards having one in each district, but I think we need to keep in mind, that's one person in each district. I have
Right, which
7
is-
schools in my district, and they're K-12, and one person having to coordinate all that,
Yeah.
considering the challenges that we're faced with, this feels like a beginning baby step to me.
It's a
and
very,
not where we
very
need to
tiny
be.
baby step, absolutely.
Yeah.
These are certified positions. We also have 3 or 4 assistant level positions who are those that go immediately to students, but they would be dispersed from this team.
Okay.
They also work with teachers to help teachers recover from incidents
Exactly.
and know how to respond.
Absolutely.
But yeah, thank you.
Earlier during the foundation meeting, I think the number was shared that in Buncombe County we had 1,100 students per one. Is at the counselor level? What exactly was she referring to?
I need to ask her, because it was not, I don't know that it's not the same number I've seen for nurses per student. I don't know if she was
It
doing
is.
social work or nurses.
Recommendation is 700 to 1. We're at 1,100, but there were some schools that had none.
In the state,
In the
not
state,
us.
correct, in the
I
state.
think it was a behavioral kind of something, but I'm not sure where she
Yeah,
got
I'm
it.
not sure if it's the same
I
time.
thought she said that to mental health.
She said mental health, but then she said nurse.
You know, and again, this is part of what we really applauded was the governor's budget, very comprehensive, because he included 3 resource positions, counselors, social workers, and school nurses. So, you know, those are key positions, as Ms. Pate well knows.
Then we talk about sustaining operations. So we're asking for $65,000 to fund the Twilight School in Minchester. This program has been in existence since 2006, which is part of the graduation initiative, but we've been able to apply for grants, and the parameters around those grants has changed a lot. You could get them every other year, now it's every 2 years, so the impact that this program has on our dropout rate is just huge. So we're just trying to find secure funds to continue this program. So we're not having to seek other resources, but that's about how much we've received from some of the grant sources that we've had.
It's not just the dropout rate, it's shoring up these students to enhance them to succeed, to help them in places that they don't have the wherewithal to do that.
And just the difference, one of them is the evening program and then one is the summer program, but both of the purposes are the same. So it's just the return on the investment of this program is just huge. It would just be sad to discontinue that. We're also asking for, this would be year 3. This has been in our budget proposal for the past 2 years. So we're asking for year 3 of the math investigation workbooks. This would allow us to buy about 12,000 consumable workbooks, I'll get it out in a minute, for this grade span, for grades kindergarten to 5th grade. So this is the year 3 of that, so that would just be sustaining that program. And then we're asking for $378,000 for utilities, and this correlates to what Ms. Rube and Mr. White talked about. You know, their energy savings program has just been bank, you know, over the years, and they've done a stellar job at helping save us cost and utilities, but unfortunately it's caught up with it. And you can see, you know, the rate increases that we're facing or are facing already, and then you saw the huge spike in the natural gas usage this past winter. So with that being said, it's caused us to have to ask for money, and local money is the only funding source that we can use for utilities. There's no other source of funds that will help pay for these costs. So with that being said, I gotta hurry because my time's up. So our continuation, which is just salary benefit increases, is $2.3 million. Expansion would be the 3 positions in student services program, it's $260,000, and then sustaining operations was those 3 items, is $649,000. Our total request is $3.2 million. This represents just a little over 5% increase, of which 3.6% is continuation salary benefits, which is pretty much non-negotiable, or we can't change it. So, very late request, very late. So, and again, y'all are aware of the timeline. If you choose to accept this proposal and adopt it tonight, then we will submit it to the county commissioners. Our presentation is on May 8th, so we'll be doing that next week. Of course, the General Assembly will come back in May, and all this may be changed. And it is contingent on the final state budget negotiations. You know, we're hopeful that they'll be in and out really fast this year, but we don't know. So with that being said, chances are we'll be bringing to you an interim budget resolution for 2018-19 on June 28th, so we can carry on operations July 1st. And then once we get our information from the state, and DPI is very quick about turnaround time. They usually have up to 10 days to give us our information, but you know, they're usually pretty quick about that. And then we'll bring you a final budget resolution for your review and or approval.
So you characterize this as a lean request.
I do think it's a lean
Is it
request.
too lean?
I don't. I think it's reasonable, but
It's our job to advocate for our teachers and students. Are we doing that enough? Are there things that we should be asking for that we're not?
well, I mean, there's always things we want to ask for, but I think with the conversations, the meetings, the committees, and everyone that brought things to the table, I think we have encompassed those requests in here and focused on the primary necessary things. And Dr. Baldwin probably has a lot more to say about that.
And again, I just remind the board that we could have been in a situation with a an obese budget, is that possible, an obese budget?
Oh, in my dreams.
You would have had to
You
have,
don't have to ask for K-3 classes.
that's exactly right. which is
Right, so, you know,
$3+
it's
million.
kind of a strategy, you know, and, I mean, again, this could change, you know, and we may be coming back to the table, but, you know, I think we've been, we've covered everything that, we need to. I mean, is that what you think?
I mean, another thing that I can think of that we need is an increase in SRO coverage, especially at the elementary level, but that would come out of the sheriff's budget, not ours. Is that
Right, and I'll share with you, I just submitted a request, it was a legislative request, that was due today, actually, they wanted to know how many SROs we had in our schools and the full-time equivalents that they were at the schools. So, with us contracting those services with the sheriff's department, there's like 3 categories, how many SROs are on your payroll, which for us is 0. So Lieutenant Ruby helped me with that information, so I just sent that to DPI, and DPI is gathering this data for the legislators. So I'm hopeful that they're gonna see that, but we have 21 SROs that serve our entire school district. And so, you know, the full-time equivalent at your elementary and intermediate schools is a lot less than the high school and middle school. So I'm hopeful that will, you know, they will see the need that.
But again, that will not come out of our budget, that would be.
That's correct. And we also applied, we get a little bit of money from the state board that helps pay for this contract for the sheriff's department. So we did reapply for funding, and currently we're getting $215,000, we're asking for $660,000. So that would help us get more SROs.
And the real positive news coming out of there's a legislative task force. In fact, Mr. Huff just attended a meeting on our behalf a couple days ago. And from that task force, that's one of the primary recommendations they're making in terms of enhancing training for school resource officers, as well as increasing numbers, along with the governor's budget, and focused upon that as well.
About 5 or 6 considerations. That specifically is one, is that grant for SROs that we submit for, is them allocating more funds to increase those grant funds.
Thank you, Ms. Frisbee. As always, you boggle our minds with your money and your requests. Thank you very much. And I appreciate Cindy starting the meeting, and
Which I did badly, but it's a good thing you showed up.
It's gonna be a lot shorter.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn and go down wherever it is we're supposed to go. To the Discovery Academy. Thank you. Could I get a second? Second. All those in favor? Any opposed? All right. Not a movable feast, but a movable board meeting.